started. Yep. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the online World Regional Geography Happy Hour, Office Hour. I know it shouldn't be a happy hour. That means something different. But I'm always happy when we get together for this hour. And I am John Boyer here at Virginia Tech, home of the Fighting Hokies, for World Regional Geography, GEOG 1014. And if you're tuning into this, you are very much likely in one of my classes right now in the World Regional Geography class. And before I go any further, could I get a shout out that the video and audio for this are both working and you can hear me and see me. Somebody in the chat room give me a shout out so that I know that this is going on. Here it is. Ethan Owen 23 is the first one in the hizzle saying everything is working just fine. Robot Puppy says yes, hi. Livia's back. Welcome back, Livia. W26. First time chatter from Maddie Songelmir. Thank you, Maddie. First time chatter. Michael 5000 just subscribed with Prime. I can't wait until the day that I understand what that means, but I think it's something good. So thank you so much, Michael 5000 XTTV, who subscribed with Prime. I think that's good for our Twitch channel. I don't know. It's good for me. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. And Michael 5000 XTV says, let's go! Wupple Doodle in the hizzle saying, regions, I can hear you well. And indeed, says Michael 5000. All right, well, what I was going to do tonight, for those of you that are in class currently and got my email, and I assume if you're not in my class and didn't get my email, that you don't know what's going on. So what's happening right now is the Monday night online office hour for World Regions, in which we usually talk about anything that's happening on planet Earth that people ask me questions about. And I had for the last several Mondays been talking about one of Vladimir Putin, president / prime minister / president of Russia. Wumpledoodle just gave me a heart. Thank you for the heart, Wumpledoodle. I heart you back, although I'm old and tired and don't know how to heart back on Twitch. And I have been talking about Vladimir Putin for pretty much the better part of a month of Mondays. Last week, I had an emergency arise, a business emergency, not a personal emergency, so I had to cancel office hours. And then it occurred to me that maybe I've talked about Vladimir Putin for too long and that I really need to do a whole 3 or 4 month Monday night lecture series just on Russia. And for those of you in the World Regional Geography class right now, you've just been through 3 weeks of learning about international organizations. And it occurred to me in a dream, in a vision, let's say, in some deep REM, that I need to update the international organizations lectures, because I made those a while back and a lot has changed. And that the international organizations in particular, ones called the EU, NATO, the WTO, the SCO, and a couple others. These are international organizations, but they're tied into things that have been happening with Vladimir Putin's Russia for the last 20 years. And so it occurred to me that, hey, I should do some updates on international organizations. And the one that has changed the most, the international hostess with the mostest change in the last exact 365 days, with no question, is an international organization called NATO. And it ties into the story of Vladimir Putin and modern Russia. And of course, it's the international organization that has changed the most in the last 1 year because Russia invaded. I'm going to take this back. Hold on. Because Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine literally just over 1 year ago today. Actually, was it just three days ago that it was the 1 year anniversary? So I felt like, wow, exactly a year and 5 days ago, I would not have had much to say about what was happening with NATO. It's an international organization that's been around since 1949. Those of you that have taken my class or are in it right now, understand the history of that organization, but I wouldn't have had much to edit with it a year and a half ago. But boy, do I now. And of course, it is intimately related to what's happening in the world. And the edits that we're getting ready to talk about, the updates on NATO, are all because of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Let me step back from that for 1 second and say, I'm going to try to intentionally for the rest of my life, when I talk about the Ukrainian-Russian war, I am trying to intentionally say it is Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I like that terminology because it is more truthful and to the point than saying Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Because, and I think everyone who's in the office hour right now understands this, Russia is a giant country. It's the biggest country geographically by square footage on planet Earth. It is the biggest nuclear power on planet Earth, and I am saying that intentionally. It does have more nuclear weapons than the United States. It's one of the biggest militaries on planet Earth. It's one of the top 20 economies on planet Earth. It's a big country. Russia actually did not invade Ukraine. Its leader, President Vladimir Putin, decided unilaterally by himself that he personally wanted to invade Ukraine for his own political motivations, for his own political gain, to satisfy his own personal view of how the world should be shaped. Who knows? We will never know how many people within the Russian military or the Russian elite circle of power agreed with him, and it doesn't matter if they did or did not. Vladimir Putin personally, by himself, decided that he personally was going to invade Ukraine using the military might of his country in order to do it. So I don't like to talk about a Russian-Ukrainian war. I think it's much more succinct and to the point to say Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Now let me put that aside. That's what I wanted you to understand about my terminology. Tonight's podcast / lecture / free rambling, whatever, is all about NATO. And I would not have done an update about NATO a year and a half ago because there wouldn't have been much to update. And brothers and sisters, let me tell you, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has completely and utterly upended, revitalized, and galvanized this international organization that you know about called NATO. So tonight is just a freewheeling NATO Updato, because it is time to update what's going on with this particular group, its strategy, its outlook, its active missions, and its future have been completely changed by Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine just 1 year ago, plus or minus 3 days. Turd Maestro's in the house saying, greetings, Flight Avenger. I noticed you were in the just chatting section. How about just chatting? Oh, I like that. It is I, Turd Maestro. Shatting is an appropriate term for you, Turd Maestro. Waterboy Links. Say your stream's quality has gotten a lot better. BTW. Well, thank you, Waterboy Links. I can assure you it's through no fault of mine that things have gotten better, but I'm glad they look better to you. Plaid Katie is taking credit on that. M. Wafar in the house saying, let Ukraine in NATO. Ooh, that's an interesting one. A Mac user with the hashtag NATO Updato. This is the NATO Updato 2023. Inverted Deception. Ooh, good screen name. Says no Ukraine in NATO. Inverted Deception and M. Wafar. I like your counter-opposing opinions, of which you must have strong inner thoughts about that for either of you or both of you to be making those specific statements about let them in, no, don't let them in. But we're going to get to that in a little bit. Melina Panda says, why aren't all countries placing sanctions on Russia? Ooh, Melina, that's a very interesting question. It can be answered actually fairly easily. Some countries like Russia, so they're not going to place sanctions on Russia. Other countries support Russia. They think it's great to go invade other countries because some leaders on planet Earth believe might makes right. And if you're powerful, you should do whatever the hell you want to on planet Earth, including taking over other countries near you. China believes that. North Korea believes that. Iran believes that. Maybe Venezuela believes that. Although Venezuela is not in a position to take over other countries, but there are countries that believe that might makes right, and they believe that Russia should do whatever it wants. Mostly because they want to do whatever they want. So they're going to support a fellow dictatorship / fascist country / aggressive power because it is a difference of opinion of how you think the world should be run right now. So some countries are dependent on Russia and aren't going to put sanctions on them. Some countries support Russia and aren't going to put sanctions on them. Some countries actually just really hate the United States. And that's where Venezuela comes in. There are countries like Venezuela and Iran that just hate the U.S. so much, they're going to support Russia just because they hate the U.S. So there are always underlying reasons why countries are going to do or not do what to your mind is the right thing. Remember, the right thing to do on planet Earth is a relative opinion. It's relative to you as a human. It's relative to countries as groups of humans of what they believe is the right thing to do. And in the case of, say, North Korea or China or Russia or Belarus, these are dictatorships. So the people's opinions in those countries are of no value. Only the leader's opinion is of value. And so leaders who fashion themselves after Vladimir Putin, they're not going to sanction Russia. They want to behave like Russia. So there's a variety of reasons why countries would not sanction Russia, including, by the way, I'll throw in a third or fourth or fifth category of countries that won't sanction Russia because they're benefiting economically from this chaos. And I'll throw India into that equation. I actually love India. India is actually a democracy. But India is not going to sanction Russia because India is getting shit tons of oil at cut rate prices because the West, Team West, is not buying Russian oil. Russia's desperate for money. Not desperate, they're doing okay. But Russia wants to sell the tons of oil they have. And India's like, this is great. This is like half price oil at the local supermarket. So they're not going to sanction Russia because they are getting a deal out of this mess. So there's a variety of reasons why everyone on planet Earth does not believe the same way that Team West does. And I particularly point at the United States. Not every country on planet Earth believes the way that the United States does about what Russia's doing in Ukraine. I'm sorry, Vladimir Putin's doing in Ukraine. For a variety of reasons. Does that make sense? Oh my gosh, there was a whole bunch of comments that popped up. Does that make sense, Melina, Panda, why not all countries are in consensus that Vladimir Putin trying to take over another sovereign state is bad? Not all countries think that, but for different reasons. Michael 5000 says, is it because they also don't want to piss them off? There could be that too. Although it's increasingly hard to understand who is actually scared of Russia in today's world. I mean, they have nuclear weapons. They can kill anybody they want. Russia can kill the entire human species. Easy. Vladimir Putin could decide in 5 minutes, I'm going to end all humans. They have the firepower to do it. Now, could they kill every single human currently alive? Maybe not, but they can certainly end all human civilization as we know it, and it likely would cause a planetary climatic disaster that would kill all humans. So Russia has the power to end our species. So does the United States. China's getting close, by the way. North Korea can not do much, but they could kill some people, mostly in South Korea and Japan. So don't discount Russia can do anything they want. But I got on this rant because Michael 5000 asked, are there countries who aren't sanctioning them because they're scared of Russia? I don't think so. Russia now has shown its 100% incompetence on the battlefield in Ukraine. So I don't know who else would be that worried that Russia's going to take them over. Kazakhstan, perhaps. There you go. That's a good one, Michael. See, if I just keep talking long enough, the answers come to me. So Kazakhstan and other Central Asian states might not want to sanction Russia simply because they're not trying to get into a fight with Russia, because they themselves, and I pick on Kazakhstan in particular, Kazakhstan has a significant number of ethnically Russian people in it. Significant. Vladimir Putin is currently invading and killing Ukrainians on the basis that there are ethnic Russians in Ukraine that he has to personally protect. So Kazakhstan, to your point, Michael, is a good example of that's a country that might abstain from doing or saying anything about Russia, not because they agree with what's going on in Ukraine. They do not. But they also don't want to be next. Again, it seems increasingly unlikely that Russia would invade Kazakhstan since they've not fared well in Ukraine yet. But the Russians could likely overrun Kazakhstan fairly easily. No offense to my Kazakh friends. But Kazakhstan's not in Europe. Kazakhstan does not have a whole bunch of European allies. Kazakhstan does not have treaties with the United States to come and help them. So Kazakhstan would be in a much different situation than Ukraine is in should Russia decide, should Vladimir Putin decide to invade Kazakhstan to go protect ethnically Russian people, of which there are more in Kazakhstan than there are in Ukraine. I'm saying that in a very cavalier manner, like I know. I actually don't know that's true. But I'm a betting man, and I'm betting on myself. I believe there are about as many ethnic Russians in Kazakhstan as there are in Ukraine, if not more. Somebody can fact check me on that if you can figure out how to search that. Let's see. Robot Puppy in the Hizzle. Welcome back, Robot Puppy says, no World War III, please. I agree, Robot Puppy. Michael 5000 pulls out his Vladimir Putin icon, which you can get if you subscribe or do something here. I don't even know how it works. Dr. Tooth Slayer, future dentist, says, thoughts on the 2% rule, is it enough? James Dean, yeah, just gave me a heart. Thank you, James Dean. I heart you back. Dr. Tooth Slayer, the future dentist, says, thoughts on the 2% rule, is it enough considering the cost of maintaining a military? I'll get to that in a little bit, Dr. Tooth Slayer. The answer right now is, yep, that might be enough, but everybody's going to go more than 2%. No one knows what we're talking about, Dr. Tooth Slayer, but I'm going to catch everybody up. Madison Gilmer in the Hizzle saying, are you doing Where's Boyer this semester? Yes, we'll start that. I was waiting for the weather to get warmer, but thank God global warming's already here, and it's already like 50 or 60 or 70 degrees in February, so I guess we can start Where's Boyer now. I usually don't start it when it's negative 20 outside, but apparently that's not happening anymore in Blacksburg. Michael 5000 says, fair enough. Ethan Owens is pulling out the Putin icon. Melinda Panda says, yes, thank you. Robot Puppy says, are they scared of Russia or are they scared of Putin? Putin now is Russia, much the same way that Xi Jinping now is China. There's 1.5 billion people in China. None of them matter at all in international politics. None of them. None of them. Sorry to my Chinese friends. None of your opinions matter. Xi Jinping is China. If Xi Jinping wants to bomb Taiwan, Xi Jinping will bomb Taiwan. The other 1.5 Chinese people have no say in the matter. And I'm pointing that out specifically so you understand how the world is working right now. Kim Jong-un in North Korea is North Korea. No other North Koreans matter. If Kim Jong-un wants to start nuclear war, he only has to ask Kim Jong-un. I'm giving you those two examples so you understand Vladimir Putin is Russia. There's 150 million Russian people. None of their opinions matter. None of their lives matter. What they want out of life doesn't matter. What 150 million Russians think about the rest of the planet does not matter. Vladimir Putin, a single human, is Russia. Vladimir Putin, a single human, is in charge of Russia. Vladimir Putin, a single human, is in charge of the entire Russian military, the entire Russian nuclear arsenal, and the entire realm of Russian thought on the world stage. What Russia does on the world stage is what Vladimir Putin wants it to do. So does that answer your question? Are they scared of Russia? Are they scared of Putin? You should be scared of Putin. He is Russia, much the same way, and I'm not, let me take a breath. I'm not saying Vladimir Putin is a Nazi. I'm not saying Xi Jinping is a Nazi. But the reference is very similar to the way Adolf Hitler was Germany. He even said it in a speech. I am the state. I am the state. You don't have to worry about anybody else's damn opinion. I am in charge. I will decide who we go to war with. I will decide everything. That is true fascism. Is Russia and or China and or North Korea in a true fascism state? Yeah, it's a matter of some political debate. We're splitting definitional hairs about these things, but they certainly are closing in on dictators / military dictators / one-party state / fascism. These are leaders that are in charge of every single thing that's happening in their country. There's no debate. There's no higher council. There's no Congress or Duma or Diet. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. These are leaders that hold ultimate power, and they do what they want to do. So, yeah, you don't really got to be worried about China. You got to be worried about what Xi Jinping thinks about you. Taiwan doesn't have to care what 1.5 million people think. They have to worry about what Xi Jinping thinks. And that's the way that Vladimir Putin's Russia is. You should be worried about what Vladimir Putin thinks of your country, because no one else in his country has an opinion or has a voice or has any power to do anything about it except Vladimir Putin. Okay. But it's already 8:20. I haven't even got to NATO yet. So hang on. Let me get through the rest of these. James Dean, yes, says, isn't Russia kind of promoting some of the regimes in Central Asia? Yes. Vladimir Putin 100% has made it clear he would like to, I don't know if he wants to reinstate the entire Soviet Union, a Soviet Union reboot, but he certainly has decided to invade Ukraine based on historical and ethnic composition. And so Russia used to control, under the guise of Great Soviet Union, used to control all those Central Asian states. But most of those Central Asian states are comprised mostly of other ethnic groups that actually aren't even of the same religious group as the majority Russian people in Russia. And Russia doesn't have a long lineage historically of controlling Central Asia. That's a product of the last 100, what year is it now? Russia being in control of Central Asia is a product of the last century or century and a half at best. Russia being in control of what's now Ukraine, that you're looking at more like a millennium, where Russia says, hey, we've been in charge of this place and have historic and religious and ethnic ties and linguistic ties here for 1,000 years. That's the argument Vladimir Putin's making to taking over Ukraine and perhaps other parts of Eastern Europe. Not so much in Central Asia. I don't know that the Central Asian states have to worry so much until Vladimir Putin and Russia gets powerful enough to want to reboot Soviet Union, which doesn't seem likely now, given that they can't even take over Ukraine, that they have more of a historic right to, and I don't believe they have a historic right to it, but that's the argument they're making. Ethan Owens 23 says, sometimes I start a sentence and don't even know where it's going to, says Michael Scott. Ethan Owen, that's me every day of my life, every second of every day. Vikram Tiwari back in the hizzle. Welcome back, Vikram. Hope you're doing well, my friend. Could this also be the reason why India supports Russia right now, because of Soviet support during Indo-Pak War 1971 to free Bangladesh? Correct. So obviously, Vikram has some insider knowledge of South Asian politics and history, since I believe Vikram is currently located in South Asia. So yes, I don't know that there's ever been a very, very, very strong India-Russia tie. However, because, by the way, Vikram, you know this, India was one of the countries that joined the non-aligned movement during the Cold War. The NAM, N-A-M, the non-aligned movement. Countries that said, look, we're not siding up with the Soviets and we're not siding up with Team West. We're doing our own thing. So India has always been a very independent player. And it's serving them well right this second, because while the United States and Team West would very much love India to join Team West as a democracy, as a capitalist democracy, as a freedom-loving, human rights-loving capitalist democracy, the Team West would love India to join, but India has always seen itself as an independent player. And right now, it's gaining so much from cheaper oil from Russia that it's playing the fence a little bit. It's saying, hey, it doesn't behoove us. It doesn't behoove our national interest to fall in on either side of this right now. Exactly the same way it made no sense for them to do it during the Cold War. So India is playing the NAM role once more here in what I think is quite obviously a reboot of the Cold War. We're 1 year into the new Cold War, into the 21st century Cold War, and I don't see India and other countries who were non-aligned last century really getting aligned this century. But I could be wrong. India might be convinced to join in on Team West's side if the benefits that Team West will provide them will outweigh the benefits they're currently getting from this super cheap oil that they're getting from Russia right now because of this whole debacle. M. Waffer says, aren't there some of the Ukrainians being killed ethnic Russians? Sure. Yeah, ethnic Russians in Ukraine are being killed. Ethnic Ukrainians are being killed. Ethnic Tartars are being killed. I mean, everybody's being killed in Ukraine right now on both sides of the conflict, by the way. So there might be ethnic Ukrainians who are fighting for Russia right now in the eastern provinces who really like Russia more. It's such a mixed up world for us as outsiders to even understand the motivations of individual human beings that I don't try. That's why I'm a generalist. And I'm like, I'm looking at the bigger picture here. Understanding completely that there are exceptions to everything you hear and everything you think. There are always exceptions, and it's just kind of a mess. But most war is. And Melina Panda says, wouldn't that also be genocide? Yes, Melina, if you had tuned into a podcast of this very same online office hours Monday, like 2 Mondays ago, I suggested that the Team West is waiting. They're holding their cards to play the genocide card when it behooves them. And Vladimir Putin, personally, because this is his personal war, Vladimir Putin, in his heart of hearts, in his mind of minds, if Voldemort were to penetrate his mind using Voldemort powers, Vladimir Putin truly believes there is no such thing as Ukrainians. He just doesn't. He believes that Ukrainians / Russians / Belarusians are all the same group. By the way, I'm not suggesting I'm a psychologist psychoanalyzing this guy. He's talked about it. He's written about it. He has said, hey, we're all the same people. Ukrainians are Russians. They just or live in a different place and they speak in an accent. But it's all Russian. And their languages are related, by the way. And historically, they are related. So he's making an argument that, look, we're not doing anything wrong here besides reunifying the old empire from 1,000 years ago. That's a decent argument, by the way, for those that want to dismiss Russia out of hand. And I am one of those, by the way. It's an aggressive move that's costing the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and making misery. So, no, I'm not a fan of what Vladimir Putin's doing in Ukraine. But I get it, and I understand his argument. And anyone that doesn't understand his argument, therefore would also not be a supporter of modern-day Israel. Because modern-day Israel makes the exact same argument that, hey, this is our historic homeland. And we just took back our historic homeland. Vladimir Putin's basically saying the same thing. And that may really piss off ardent Zionists and maybe even just casual Jewish people. I'm not passing judgment. I'm just saying, look, modern-day Israel was a recreation of a historic Israel from several millennia ago. And Vladimir Putin's essentially making the same argument of like, hey, we used to own this territory, and it used to be ours, and we're related to all the people there, and it is just our historic territory that we're just going to take back. The arguments are extremely similar, if not identical. Even that's offensive to people. I'm not here to make you feel good about yourself. I'm not here to make you happy. I'm also not here to offend intentionally. This is just me understanding how the modern world is working, and the tactics that Vladimir Putin is using are extremely similar to this kind of this historic angst that this is our area and we need to get our area back. We live in a world, all of us that are alive, me, my whole life, and I'm older than all of you all, and you all, our whole lives, since we have been alive, we've lived in a 20th century built world of rules, of nation states and sovereignty. And we all said almost 100 years ago, here's all the lines, here's all the borders, we're all going to respect our stuff. We're done with history. In this, we're all going to say we all recognize our borders and let's go forward so we don't have wars. And that has held since 1949. This movement that Russia's doing upends that whole rules-based system that all of us have lived in for our entire lives. That's why it's such a big deal to old people, by the way, because it makes the whole world very uneasy that the rules that we all have been living by for 70 years may suddenly all be thrown out the window. That's problematic for a lot of people on planet Earth, not just the Ukrainians, if that makes any sense. So I see Madison Gilmore says, yay, Turd Maestro is back in the house. Plaid Avenger Israel Jesus. Well, thank you, Turd Maestro. Michael 5000, everywhere Plaid Avenger Takeover. Turd Maestro says, when I was in Seattle, I met a Ukrainian guy who moved last year. He said he doesn't believe a single city in Ukraine wanted to join Russia. I was actually surprised. Well, he was from Ukraine, so obviously his opinion was jaded. There were, I don't believe, I'm not going to call him misinformed, but we all believe what we want to believe, and we all believe that about our country that we want to believe. We don't want to believe anything ill about our neighbors. However, Turd Maestro, there were and are a lot of ethnically Russian people in the eastern provinces of Ukraine, in the eastern provinces close to Russia, that are ethnically Russian. And yeah, many of them were fine with going back to Russia. Many of them were fine when a Russian-sponsored puppet was in charge of Ukraine and was trying to make Ukraine cozy up to Russia and wanted to get out of openly rejected joining the EU, openly rejected joining NATO. And a majority of folks in Ukraine wanted to do that. And so this Russian puppet was pulling Ukraine back into Russian orbit. And that's actually what caused the current consternation. That was back in 2014. All this mess that you're currently seeing right now started in 2014. It didn't start last year. It started in 2014. But that's a whole nother issue. I was supposed to be talking about NATO. So let me try to get to NATO real quick. Okay, so I got Turd Maestro. James Dean, what do you think it would take to bribe the Turks to accept Sweden and Finland? We'll get to that in just a second. Ethan Owen says, what would make him stop at just taking over Ukraine, though? Nothing. Try to keep this in mind, everybody. There are three options there are three endings to Vladimir Putin's invading Ukraine. 1, Ukraine wins, Russia loses. 2, Russia wins, Ukraine loses. 3, and the most likely, stalemate for months to years. Of those three options, Russia benefits from 2 of them. So Russia wins and gets back Ukraine, good for Russia. Stalemate, constant war, that's okay with Russia too. So the 2 out of 3 options are okay with Russia. And that's why Vladimir Putin won't stop. A protracted stalemate war keeps everybody on edge, keeps Vladimir Putin's control of the Russian population solid, keeps everybody in a nationalist line where they're all supporting the country because they're all at war. In times of war, almost everyone in any country on planet Earth throughout all the history supports the leader. So a protracted war that makes Russians terrified that NATO is going to invade them, that the U.S. is going to invade them, that nuclear war is possible, that the Ukrainians are going to come get them, whatever fantasy is contrived by the Russian propaganda, all of those things serve to strengthen Vladimir Putin. All of them. So protracted war forever benefits Vladimir Putin. It just does. So they're fine with all those things. They don't even need to win. Vladimir Putin's getting what he wants. Vladimir Putin has wanted to reinstate the Cold War. He actually really wanted to reinstate the Soviet Union, but he's failing that because he found out it's not going to happen. Protracted war makes the Cold War back on, and all Russian people have to line up behind him and support him until his death. And that's actually the most likely option. Vladimir Putin he's got at least 10 years, maybe 20 or 30 years. He will be in charge of Russia. Russians will have no voice whatsoever, and he will be at war with the West, and that suits his goals in terms of staying in power, staying in charge. Vladimir Putin doesn't lose. Lots of Russians will die, but Vladimir Putin himself does not lose at all. Okay, first time chatter from Tyson VT says World War III would stop him. Yes, although he's probably got a pretty good bunker, Tyson, but thanks for your first time chat. Vladimir Putin might be one of the ones that survives, although do you want to survive World War III? Personally, I'm too old. Hopefully you all are younger, more vibrant. You'd like to push through, but not me. I'm tired. The Blind Barber back in the hizzle saying, would today's situation look different if Europe gave the same level of support to Georgia in 2008 as they are giving to Ukraine today? Woo! Wow, that is a deep question, Blind Barber. We'll have to think about that for a different podcast. So Blind Barber knows a bit more detail than perhaps most of you do, which is Georgia, the country, not the state in the United States, was invaded by Russia in 2008. By the way, Blind Barber, do you remember what day it was? I do. It was the first day of the Olympics in China. That's when Vladimir Putin decided to give the go-ahead to invade Georgia. So, yes, that is a great thinking point, Blind Barber. Had the West done as much for Georgia as it's doing for Ukraine right now, we would definitely be in a different scenario. Definitely. Okay, but first-time chatter, R477. Thank you, R4, for getting us back on track. And by the way, this is a prototype lecture, so I'm going to do this with the intent on, based on your questions and your comments in the next 30 minutes. I'll only go for 30 more minutes to do the update. For the next 30 minutes, I'm going to talk about NATO, and then I will parlay that into a better condensed lecture with graphics about what's going on with NATO. But for now, and so I'm going to retool this into a better permanent 2023 NATO Updato. This is the prototype. Let's get to it now, shall we? 40 minutes later. I love this Twitch group. Good Lord, you all keep me so off track. That's what's so great about it. Okay, so let me give you some updates, and I will continue to field questions about these updates, all right? So are you ready? Here we go. Why would I suggest that this war, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine exactly a year ago, has had the biggest impacts on NATO? Well, because truly, of all of the different countries on planet Earth, states, and all the international organizations on planet Earth, none has been as affected by this war by a single human onto Ukraine. Ukraine, by the way, is not a member of NATO. All of you know this. We would have had World War III if Ukraine was a member of NATO because of Article 5, which you all know about. So let me perhaps start with the reason I wanted to do an update on NATO, the NATO Updato, is that this newly unified NATO is on they were already unified. So NATO is a 30-country bloc, 30 states are in this club, and it's a defensive club. And you know, I hope at this point in your life that its real only important tenet, the only real rule that need concern you about the NATO Charter is Article 5. And that is, it's a defensive pact that says, if you sign up in this club and any single one of us gets attacked, then all of us consider it an attack on all of us. No questions asked. If you're in this club and you get attacked, all 30 of us consider that an attack on all 30 of us, and we will respond in kind. It's a very powerful statement, NATO Article 5. And it does discourage greatly any country from outside the club from attacking any one of its members, even if it's a small country who's weak. So I'm not even sure if Luxembourg is in NATO. I think they are. But Luxembourg, hell, all of us in this chat room right now could take over Luxembourg personally. But we would not, because Luxembourg's in NATO. And Luxembourg can invoke Article 5. And if me and you all and a bunch of other yahoos with guns, which is not hard to find in America, were to go invade Luxembourg, we wouldn't just be taking on the government military of Luxembourg. We'd be taking on the governments and militaries of 30 different states, some of the most powerful militaristic and nuclear weapon states on planet Earth. And we can't do that. And even China can't do that. And even Russia don't want to do that. Venezuela's not going to do that. South Africa's not going to do that. So it's a very potent club. And it has been around since 1949, but it's been slacking as of late. So the reason I wanted to do this update was, this is a entity that's been around for a while, but it's been kind of hanging out. And it was up for question for the last several years specifically if it was even going to survive. But what has happened in exactly the last 1 year is that this newly unified and galvanized NATO is on the verge of making a whole slew of seismic decisions. And this is all going to start in a meeting they're having in June or July in Lithuania. This summer coming up. T-minus 4 months. March, April, May, June. Yeah, T-minus 4 or 5 months when the next big NATO meeting happens. And this NATO meeting is going to be one of its biggest meetings literally since World War II. It's going to be a big deal because they're making decisions to revolutionize the entire organization, how it defends itself, how it gets the smaller countries and countries that aren't even that small but are not spending as much to start pulling more of their weight in the alliance. This is an entity, like I said, 30 countries that protects perhaps 1 billion people are some stats I've seen recently. And you got to think there's 375 million people just in the United States. So it's U.S. and Canada and France and Germany and Norway and the UK and Italy and Spain. I mean, all of Western Europe basically, plus the U.S. and Canada. It's 1 billion people that are under this defensive network umbrella. And what's going to happen in June is some of the most sweeping transformations in its 74-year history. It's all going to happen in Lithuania, and it's going to involve spending way much more money, troop movement, changing attitudes in general, changing budgets, changing members. And by changing members, I mean adding members, changing troop deployment, changing military focus, changing powers. There's going to be some up and coming new found centers of military and political power in Europe. And changing attitudes about what NATO's mission is across planet Earth. This is a big, big, big deal. I can't say enough about how I have been around for 55 years or so, plus or minus 5 years. At this age, who knows? And I've been teaching for 25, plus or minus 5. Who knows with the alcohol? I cannot reference any single country or any other international organization that's undergoing this revolutionary of change in my teaching lifetime. Now, I said teaching lifetime. This is the biggest thing that's happened since I've been teaching for 25 years. And it's still not getting that much press. It's a game changer for planet Earth, quite frankly. It's certainly a game changer for Team West, but it's a game changer because Team West is a potent player on the planet, and therefore it has planetary impact. I would only hesitate from saying it's the biggest thing I've ever lived through, because I have lived through bigger. I mean, the crashing and burning of the Soviet Union, the implosion of the Soviet Union in 1989 and 1991, that was probably the biggest thing that happened in my lifetime. Sorry, the lights went out. Let me go fix that real quick. I forgot about the damn lights. All these lights are on a damn time-sensitive thing without movement, so I had to uncover the movement area. Sorry about that. So while I was raging about what a big deal this is, let me get back on point. It's hard to underestimate this, and for my Russian friends, for my Chinese friends, for friends and former students out on planet Earth that perhaps don't even agree with many of the kind of standard operating procedures of Team West, who may disagree with the formation of NATO or the mission of NATO. There are many people, even here in the United States and in Europe, who say NATO should have gone away. There are many people that say NATO is the cause for Russia to invade Ukraine. I'm sorry, for Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine. I always find those arguments bizarrely shallow. Vladimir Putin is doing what Vladimir Putin wants. Vladimir Putin did not invade Ukraine because he really thought that NATO was getting ready to invade his country. I'm sorry, that's just an argument that's a bridge too far for anybody of any common sense who understands how the world works to think that's what Vladimir Putin's true motivations were. He just wants to protect Russia from NATO invading. NATO is a defensive organization. Of course, I'm under the NATO umbrella, so I favor it, but I recognize my predilection. I recognize that I am jaded in my opinion because I live under this umbrella. But if you just step back and look at it, it's a defensive organization. It's a defensive organization. Yes, it's a defensive organization whose borders have crept closer to Russia, but it's for very good reason that those borders have crept closer to Russia, and it's because all of the countries that Russia used to control were desperate to get out from the umbrella and iron fist of Russia. The United States did not make Poland join NATO. The United States did not make Estonia join NATO. Those countries and the people and majorities of people within them were desperate to join NATO because they have lived under harsh rule of Russia/Soviet Union for the better part of a century, and they didn't want to do it anymore. So if you believe in democracy, if you believe in human rights, if you believe humans should have a voice, which is what democracy is, I'm not going to second guess that Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Hungary, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, I'm not going to say they were forced to join NATO by the United States, and therefore Russia had to invade Ukraine. I'm sorry, Vladimir Putin had to invade Ukraine because the big bad United States was coming for them. Those countries not only willingly joined NATO and the European Union, they did it in haste as quickly as they could because they feared Russia, and they still do. Sorry to get so passionate about this because I don't want to offend my Russian friends. But don't blame the U.S. when countries say, hey, can we be in your club? We would prefer to be in your club than be in that club. Don't blame the better club because the people wanted to leave your club to get into the better one. Humans are going to do what they find in their self-interest to do. And no one, much less the United States or any other single bad entity, forced most of Eastern Europe to look west. The Eastern Europeans looked west for their own reasons, and they're very good reasons. Let me let that rest right now while I get back to NATO. So, and I'm sorry, I'm probably missed some comments here. Let's see. I did miss a bunch of comments. Damn it. Sorry, guys. Let's see. If Russia were to win, what would be their next move? To take over other entities would be the common one. However, most of the other countries around Ukraine are in NATO now. So Russia is not in a position to take over other countries because that would invoke Article 5, which would invoke nuclear war, which would invoke the end of the species. So Russia might have grabbed Ukraine, and they would have grabbed Moldova, by the way. That's the quick answer, Baivash. They would have immediately grabbed Moldova, which is right next door, and has ethnic Russians in them. So they would have grabbed that, and they might have made moves to take over, perhaps to reestablish ties with Serbia, to perhaps further entrench their friendship with Turkey and take over more parts of the Black Sea, to take over Georgia, perhaps even Armenia, although Armenia is an ally of Russia for obvious reasons because they don't want to be taken over. Had Russia been successful, easily successful in Ukraine, they might have actually made the play to take back over Central Asia, the STAN countries. But again, that doesn't look likely right this second. Inverted Deception says, we love you too. Well, thank you, Inverted Deception. Michael says, this is a good live stream. Thank you, Michael. A Florida man could do it. No questions asked. Not even sure what that's reference to, but I love it. Mac user 1232 says, Luxembourg/SES, the satellite operator, recently signed a contract to provide NATO with satellite communications. Boom! Each NATO country adds what it can do best. Each country does. Each country of NATO, by a pact that was signed, was a pact or a bylaw of NATO, but in 2014, when Russia took over the Crimean Peninsula, and this, if I was writing test questions, or if you guys are interested in this, ask me. But 2014 is actually a pivotal date in a lot of this, because that's when Russia took over the Crimean Peninsula and literally took it from Ukraine. It was part of sovereign state Ukraine's territory at the time. And there's a backstory to this for my Russian friends, all right? There was very good reason why Russia always wanted to take back Crimea, and actually there were very good reasons why Russia probably should have been given back Crimea. Sorry to my Ukrainian friends, but there are many reasons. It's another podcast. So, where was I going with that? In 2014, when Russia took back Crimean Peninsula, that's when, this is the test question, that's when a lot of countries in Eastern Europe who were NATO members started to take this a lot more seriously. And while France and Germany, I'll keep making fun of France and Germany wanted to keep appeasing Vladimir Putin, and they have, and they still want to. France and Germany are anti-war, they're peaceniks, they don't want to offend Russia. Especially Germany is a huge trading partner with Russia. They were. And so Germany has guilt issues because of World War II. They don't want to be seen as militaristic. They don't want to get into a war again. They don't want to spend a bunch of money on defense because they feel really bad about killing billions of people during World War II. As well they should. But perhaps, and this is what a lot of NATO countries have said, is Germany's taking it too far. They've apologized for 60 or 70 years, and now you have a really significant threat of a country, Russia, retaking back over and restarting World War II and taking back over territories. Germany, it's time to man up. You've apologized enough. We need your military and industrial might. We need you to stand up and be a leader. And Germany's not there yet. And this is back to 2014. Even when Vladimir Putin's Russia took back over Crimean Peninsula, Germany and France were like, we don't approve, but, we're not really trying to start a war about that. We're not trying to be confrontational. We're still going to trade with Russia, which they did from 2014 right on up to 2022. We still think Vladimir Putin wants to be a good guy. We still think Russia wants to be incorporated into the EU or into the modern world or into the European trade network. We still trade lots. It's going to be fine. Russia's not going to get militaristic. Russia's not going to invade. They just wanted the Crimean Peninsula back. And as I've now argued, there's reasons for that. But Germany and France were wrong. And They were totally wrong. And Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine exactly a year ago proved the point. He's insatiable. He wants what he wants, what he wants, when he wants it, which is now. And so the point I was trying to make is the Eastern European countries that used to be controlled by Mother Russia, they've been very worried about this since 2014. When Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, even Romania, possibly Bulgaria, when they saw Crimean Peninsula being taken back over by force by Russia, those countries got worried quickly. And they were the ones saying, hey guys, you see that powerful nuclear-armed country that used to be in charge of us that's being very aggressive? We're worried they're going to keep going. And Germany and France were like, nah, it'll never happen. Well, again, Poland particularly has been proven right in all this. And Poland and others were saying for 6 years, hey, can we get some missiles here? Hey, guys, hey, NATO friends, because these are all NATO countries, can we get more stuff? Because this don't look good, what's going on here. And lo and behold, they were correct. And in the last 1 year, this has changed the balance of a lot of things that are going on. By the way, let me see if I can do this real quick. I'm going to get back to Poland and Finland and Sweden and all this stuff. So I've hit several big things here. All right, tell me what you're interested in. Because of the war, because of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, NATO is going to change its attitude. It's going to change its budgets. It's going to change its members. It's going to change its troop deployments and military focus. It's going to change internally. It's going to mix up the power players within Europe proper, and it's going to change its attitudes abroad. Which one of those things are you most interested in? Well, I figure out if I can do this real quick. Is it this one? It is. I got it. So you all think about which one of those things you want to hear about in our final 10 to 15 minutes or hour or two, however long I go. And I'll, for those uninitiated, which is probably nobody still hanging out here on Twitch, because why would Twitch people who like to watch people play video games be listening to some archaic, old, shriveled professor talk about NATO crap and why it's a big deal? Here, for those that have no idea what I'm talking about with NATO, here's a quick primer. What is NATO? And I won't even get to the Quad because that's a whole nother kettle of fish that I'll get to next time. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a.k.a. the North Atlantic Alliance. I call it the core of Team West. I actually call it the military branch of Team West. And that's all the democracies of planet Earth, the pro-Western capitalist democracies of planet Earth, of which it's virtually all of Europe, all of the Americas, including even South America, mostly, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, India, which we talked about, is kind of on the fence. But those pro-human rights, pro-individual rights, pro-democracy, pro-humans, anti-fascist, anti-dictatorship, those countries on planet Earth I kind of call Team West. And NATO is its military branch, quite frankly. And it is an alliance between now 30 different countries. And by the way, it will be 32 very soon. You heard that here first. It was formed on a treaty after World War II in 1949, headquartered in Brussels, Belgium. The NATO Secretary General is always a European. That is the person you see on the news, the person who does the press conferences, the person in charge of all the political stuff is always a European. This is part of their charter. The supreme commander of actual military operations is always an American. It's just in the bylines. It's just how it works. It is the world's biggest gun club. There actually are no sitting NATO troops. They're only participatory members. The 30 members of this club, 30 different sovereign states that are of this club, they have their own militaries. In fact, you cannot join NATO unless you have a certain standards of military operations. Meaning, depending on the size of your country, you have to have a certain number of armed military people, active military people. You have to have a certain number of guns, a certain number of ships, certain number of jets, certain number of bombs, certain number of whatever. Or, as was pointed out in the chat room, you contribute to the greater good in some way. So for Luxembourg, not a big country, not a lot of humans there, not a lot of military folks full time. They contribute more money and they contribute communications or satellites. So everybody in the club, and this gets me back to 2014 when Russia took over Crimean Peninsula and people started to get really worried about this. At the time, NATO as a group said, hey, what Russia's doing doesn't look good, and it's a bad foreboding in the future. How right they were, by the way. And so we're going to sign a pact here in 2014 that says every NATO member needs to spend at least 2% of its GDP, or is it its budget? I should look into that. I believe it's its budget. It has to spend, it either is 2% of its GDP or 2% of its national budget has to go to defense so that you are NATO capable and NATO ready because you're part of this club. So in other words, everybody in the club, you have to have standards that meet the club's standards. And again, Luxembourg doesn't have a lot of submarines. They're landlocked. Luxembourg doesn't have a lot of Marines. They're a small population. Luxembourg will contribute more money to pay for more guns for other people, and communications is what it does. So it provides 2% of its national budget and or its GDP goes towards, we've got this thing that the greater group needs. In that same light, there is no standing army. There's not a bunch of people sitting around in NATO uniforms. In fact, there's no such thing as a NATO uniform. What you have is the 30 participating countries have their militaries. And if something happens, they will use their active military people to go deal with that something. That's how NATO works. It's why it's supremely effective, by the way, because to have a certain military group that's sitting around doing nothing, waiting for something to happen, is not effective. And it's costly. And who's going to pay for that? That's why you don't do it. Every country still on planet Earth has its own defense, with the exception of Costa Rica, I believe. Costa Rica got rid of its military. So every country has its own military, and the 30 countries that participate in NATO have their own military, but their military is ready to participate when called for by the greater NATO group. It's exceptionally powerful. So you have a group that's doing your own thing for your own country, but when it's time, everybody's jumping into the game. And what's that game? NATO's mission, as stated in 1947 in the Treaty of Dunkirk, signed by France and the UK's Treaty of Alliance and Mutual Assistance, in the event of a possible attack by Germany or the Soviet Union in the aftermath of World War II. Then that got added in. They basically said, hey, France and UK, we just lived through the Nazis, so we're now worried about Germany after it gets on its feet, because guess what? Germany hasn't attacked the world once, but twice. See World Wars I and II. And we're also worried about this bigger entity called the Soviet Union, which seems to be threatening and is taking over parts of Eastern Europe. So we're going to sign a pact that says, hey, we'll come to each other's aid in case Germany or the Soviet Union does something. And very quickly, the Benelux countries got added in. That's Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And then the United States, which was kind of overseeing all this and was supplying the Marshall Fund, if anybody knows what that is. The Marshall Plan provided, $100 billion for reconstruction in Europe. And so the United States had a vested interest in all these European countries being able to rebuild because they are partners and historic allies, but also rebuild their military so they could take care of themselves. So the United States was overseeing or part of this from the get-go. But then after it became Benelux in France and the UK, then in 1949, the United States came on board and said, okay, let's refashion all this and add Canada, Portugal, Italy, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and who else wants to join? And their whole thing was, again, a defense pact to all of us work together to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of its members by promoting stability and well-being in the North Atlantic area. Of course, how do we frame that to make it real? How do we put teeth into that, in other words? And NATO's raison d'etre, its reason for existence, is, of course, Article 5. Article 5 says a attack on any single member state is immediately, without question, there's no vote. There's no vote. If Turkey gets attacked, if Luxembourg gets attacked, if Canada gets attacked by those evil Greenlanders, then that is considered an attack on all 30 member states without debate. It is considered an attack, and all 30 will act as a unified whole to counter that attack by any external party, period. It's an extremely powerful statement. And again, it's extremely powerful because Russia knows this. China knows this. North Korea knows this. And they know that NATO ain't playing around. So North Korea could bomb Luxembourg. North Korea could actually bomb the United States. They keep threatening to. North Korea could bomb Canada. They've got nukes. They got intercontinental ballistic missiles. But North Korea, as wacko crazy as they are, understands NATO Article 5. And China, by the way, also recognizes NATO Article 5. So if North Korea, which is China is a big supporter, fan, and brother of North Korea. But even China knows, if North Korea is crazy enough to throw a nuclear weapon or any weapon at Canada, NATO Article 5 says 30 countries are coming to kick the living shit out of North Korea. And we're not up for debate on this. And even China's like, you know what? If North Korea does that, they're on their own. We didn't do that. We're not going to go defend them because there's 30 countries with a giant nuclear arsenal that will come down on North Korea if they do something crazy. So it's extremely powerful in that it prevents anyone from making any mistakes about what they're getting into if they attack a NATO country, if that makes sense. Okay? Back in the day, and then I'm going to switch back to hitting high spots of this update. Back in the day, this is in 1949, U.S., Canada, and all of those Western European countries. And in 1952, Turkey was the first country that joined after the initial group. And that's interesting because Turkey is a not European, not, say, Christian, not kind of historically part of Europe country that joined NATO for reasons that are perhaps a whole nother podcast. Okay? But now it's 30 states strong. And for those of you that probably already know where this is going, that's too much. I'm going to kick out at this point from this presentation. But 30 states strong at this point, and probably most of you understand that it was the former sub-states and puppet states of Great Soviet Union that were the big expansions of the last 20 years, which of course has really pissed off and threatened Russia. So you see the timeline there. 1952, Greece and Turkey joined NATO. 1955, West Germany joins NATO. East and West Germany weren't unified till 1990, so after the Soviet Union imploded in 1989, then East Germany was free to both reunify with West Germany to make a singular Germany, and then both of them are NATO members. 82, Spain joins. 99, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland were the first ones that were begging to get into NATO. From the initial implosion of the Soviet Union in 1990, 1991, those three countries are like, please let us in NATO. We don't like Russia. We don't want to get reabsorbed by Russia. Russia will rise again, and we want into NATO to ensure that we don't get taken back over by Russia. And they weren't alone. 2004, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia joined NATO. 2009, Albania and Croatia joined. 2017, Montenegro joins. 2020, North Macedonia joins. All of the ones from 1999 forward were all places that were directly part of Russia, like literally part of a sub-state of Russia, like saying Florida is part of the United States, and they broke away and became their own state, like Estonia, and then joined a defensive pact that was the alternative, absolute extreme opposite of what Mother Russia was all about. So that's why it's so offensive to the Russians. Not only did they lose the Cold War, but many of their states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, that were part of them, left and then joined the other team. But countries that were puppet states of Soviet Union during the Cold War, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, those puppet states when the Soviet Union went away, immediately wanted to join NATO as well. Join the West and join NATO. So what you've seen over time is NATO growing to be closer and closer and closer to Mother Russia. And many of the states of former Soviet Union that Russia dominated are now part of the other team. And this is what so pisses off Vladimir Putin. And to be frank and honest, worries a lot of Russians. Because the story within Russia is, look, the United States and NATO has been continually expanding to our border, and they're now so close to us they could bomb us into oblivion anytime they want. And that is what we're worried about, and Vladimir Putin has twisted that into, and that's why we're invading Ukraine, to push back against this and to perhaps retake some other territories to ensure that they're not as close to us. Because I'll be honest, it is threatening that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are part of NATO. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania literally could throw a bomb 50 miles and hit St. Petersburg, which is one of the biggest cities of Russia. I mean, strategically and militarily speaking, it is imposing and daunting and scary to Russia that these countries, which now can harbor NATO weapons, are so very close to their core cities of Novgorod, St. Petersburg, Moscow, the capital. These new NATO countries could get a missile to Moscow very easily in very short order. So I understand their angst and I understand their worry. There's no doubt about it. Does that then constitute a good reason to invade Ukraine? It depends on what side you're on. I still say, hey, I vote for people to do what they want to do, and most Ukrainians didn't want to be part of Russia to begin with, even back as far back as 1921, when they were forcibly starved to death. But that's another story. Let me go to the chat room, and then I'll switch back to the main points as we wrap this up. Let's see, Florida man, Sergeant Gummy Bear back in the Hizzle saying, I joined a bit late, but I was wondering what the ramifications are with Russia pulling out of the START nuclear treaty. I can answer that one quickly, Sergeant Gummy Bear. There's not much. The United States and the Nuclear Watchdog Agency for Planet Earth, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, yes, the IAEA and the United States have said for years that Russia was not complying with that treaty. It was not allowing inspection, so it really doesn't change the game much. It was more a political statement by Vladimir Putin, who was saying, we're going to start making more nuclear weapons. We want the Cold War back on. We're going to start making more nuclear weapons so we can scare the hell out of everybody because we're going to make more nuclear weapons. And it's like, well, again, Cold War back on. Here we go. Let's all make more weapons, even though we have enough to kill everybody already, but we'll make more. And the U.S. will make more if the Russians start making more, so that's going to happen. Let's see. Michael says, I'm gonna join the wine class when I can. Yes, please do. Inverted Deceptions, Michael, the wine class. Okay, you guys are talking wine class, horror lights into a horror live stream. Yes, Michael, it did turn into a horror live stream. Okay, Denny DeVito, did the U.S. invoke Article 5 after 9/11? Denny DeVito, great question. They did. The war in Afghanistan was actually a NATO war. That's why there were other countries involved, including Germany, which is very hesitant to get involved in war. But all of the NATO countries did help out in one way or the other, some of them hesitantly, in the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan. That was a NATO war that was conducted and led by the United States, but it was a NATO war in principle and on paper. Good question, Denny. Let's see. Milena Panda says they wanted to, but NATO said there wasn't any particular country to place blame on. Actually, Milena, they did. NATO did agree, and it was a NATO war in Afghanistan. Michael says the Frenchies always surrender. True story. Blind Barber says 2014, I was in World Regions that year. Boom. Robot Puppy said power players in Europe. Oh, when I was talking about what you want to hear about. Attitude Quad. You are an informative entertainer that's powerful like South Park. Thank you, Inverted Deception. We got a poll. It's the poll command, says Turd Maestro. Oh, wait a minute. There's a poll now? Okay.
You were asking for, but I didn't know what it was supposed to be about.
I'll go down to M. Waffer. Why did Turkey join? Turkey was a member of the Allied team at the end of World War II. They came into World War II late. mostly because they had a relationship with Germany since World War I and leading up to World War II that did not benefit them. And so when it became obvious, the Turkish chafed under the German relationship for years. And then when it became obvious that Germany was going to lose World War II, the Turkish were like, dude, can we join the Allies? We don't want to be with these guys anyway. So Turkey was a part of the Allied coalition during World War II and therefore was invited to join NATO. And it helped them because Turkey was a capitalist democracy working in that direction, even though they are predominantly Islamic and part of what many would consider the Middle East. They were very European in outlook. They wanted to join the EU, by the way. For decades, they were trying to join the EU. So Turkey, for much of modern history, was trying to be westward looking. And for various reasons, that didn't work out. But they have been part of NATO since 1952. And they are still a core component of NATO. And most NATO countries don't want to see Turkey go out of NATO, even though the relationship is very frictional right now, which I'll get to hopefully tonight, if not next time. First time chatter from Private Ham says, why isn't Austria in NATO? No one is required to join NATO. And countries like Austria, Finland, and Sweden are a better question. Why aren't they in NATO? Some countries said, just like Switzerland, hey, we're not trying to inflame tensions. We don't see the benefit. Austria and Switzerland are in the middle of NATO countries, and the easy argument is there's no benefit for us to join NATO. We're never going to get attacked. We are gaining the benefits of this organization without joining and without having to do anything, and that's true. How would anybody even attack Switzerland? It's in the middle of all the NATO countries, so it could never happen. So, you're kind of skating at some point. You're scamming. It's like, well, I can get the benefits without the payment. Why would I pay? If you get the milk for free, why buy the cow? Okay. Vikram says, could Asian countries one day also join NATO as well as Turkey did? That is the question, Vikram, that maybe we'll get to. Soggy 1001 says, probably border disputes. Inverted says, Afghanistan should join NATO since they already have billions of military equipment from the U.S. That's not going to happen. And you followed up with, that's a joke. You are correct. Okay, so we are already 20 minutes over the hour. We have barely talked about NATO. Actually, no, we've talked some. All right. However, I will get to, is it this one? Yeah. This one is just some news stories that I am referencing. And I will reference this one first and talk about some of the things. I'm just going to kind of fly through these things. You guys ask me questions as you want to go. So again, the whole point is this is a NATO Updato. Why is this such a big deal that I'm saying this international organization is going to be more changed than anything else? Okay? So first off, this has profoundly affected the group as a whole, meaning for years, if not a couple of decades, mostly European countries have mostly gotten lax. And what I mean by that is what I just said a minute ago. Why buy the cow if you're getting the milk for free? The benefit of being in NATO means that the United States would come save you if the Russians attacked, or if Afghanistan attacked, or if whoever attacked. If you were a NATO member, you could probably just get away with the bare minimum of equipment, of paying, of having soldiers, of training. Get away with the bare minimum. Don't do your 2% of your GDP, because guess what? You're already in the club, and if somebody attacks you, your friends are going to come save you. And let's be frank, your friends, meaning the United States. The United States has the biggest military on planet Earth. It spends the most on military on planet Earth. The United States military budget is bigger than the next 15 countries put together. And yes, that's including Russia and China. So the United States has an overwhelming military advantage on planet Earth. And if you're in a club where the United States has to protect you because of Article 5, then why would you give a shit? And so the big thing that's happened with this Vladimir Putin invasion, is that these European countries have gotten kind of lax. That's when I talk about changing attitudes. They've been kind of lax. They've taken it for granted especially since the demise of the Soviet Union. Many people said, why do we even have NATO? We created NATO as a counter to the Soviet Union, which we were afraid was going to invade Europe. The Soviet Union's gone. Not only is it gone, most of its puppet states and some of its former territories are now NATO members. We ain't got to worry about nothing. Well, Putin's invasion of Ukraine changed all that, and it changed all that fast. So while many countries have gotten lax of their support of NATO, and Vladimir Putin was counting on that, by the way. He was counting on that. He counted on it wrong. And his invasion of Ukraine galvanized, I keep using that word, galvanized and has given newfound strength and mission to NATO, which was absolutely unimaginable a year ago. I would have bet against it a year ago. I would have bet against it. Most of us did. It's like, now most NATO countries are pretty lax. The Europeans are lax. Germany, I don't want to make too much fun of Germany because I love Germany, but Germany's very anti-war, very anti-confrontational, very anti-aggressive because of their wartime past. They have been very hesitant to lead Europe. They have been very hesitant to even build up militarily. They don't want to do anything. They didn't want to piss off the Russians or anybody else. And France is always kind of a wave the white flag country. I'm joking, France. But France is a leader too. Both France and Germany, big, powerful countries, but both of them were much more of the attitude of, we don't really need to be doing all this. We don't perhaps even need to be engaged. We need to be growing NATO. We're not trying to be confrontational with the Russians. We can all work this out. And they were dead wrong. All of them undervalue the aggressiveness that Vladimir Putin would eventually show. I'm not faulting them, by the way. All of us want peace. It seemed like a good idea. Just didn't work out. And so the attitudes within Europe are the first big thing I'm saying has changed. The attitudes within NATO. And what I mean by that is Germany for decades has just said, we don't want to be confrontational. That's over. That is over. By the way, that's the reason why Germany didn't want to send tanks, didn't want to send Ukraine too many armaments, was hesitant to get pulled into any of this. It's just Germany. It's their attitude in general, and it has been since World War II. They just didn't want to do it. That now has changed. In fact, I think it's called Zeitenwende, which is like a turning point. And Chancellor Olaf Scholz used this term a year ago, saying, it's Zeitenwende. This is a crucial turning point for Germany. We are going to rearm. We are, I think they already promised over $100 billion in German armed forces. Maybe it's $120 billion. They started promising a lot more money to Ukraine. And again, for the last year, they've been hesitant to send tanks and other things. They're starting to bend on that. They're like, you know what? We see the writing on the wall. Germany, specifically because it is the industrial powerhouse and biggest economy of Europe, was pivotal. And it didn't want to confront Russia. It just finished helping build a Nord Stream 2 pipeline that you guys have probably heard about that was supplying natural gas from Russia to Germany, and they cut that off. Germany has led the way of weaning itself off of Russian energy. And the most important part is Germany is no longer the nice, friendly, never going to war nation. That's an attitude that is significant. That has shifted. Now, they're not going full bore and trying to rebuild a fourth or fifth Reich, but they have changed internally their attitudes, and they're not alone. Finland and Sweden, both non-NATO members, immediately a year ago said, our attitude is changing. We think we'd like to be in NATO right now. And by the way, do you understand why? And this already starts to play into changing membership of NATO. Now other countries have said, hey, we've been sitting on the sidelines. It's time to get into the game. So Germany's changing its attitude. It's already a NATO member, but it's changing its attitude to become more of a player within NATO. Sweden and Finland were not NATO members. They did not have a need to. Same with Austria and, say, Switzerland. Finland and Sweden have since World War II. They obviously were part of the Allied side of World War II, fighting against Nazis. Finland actually has fought a land war with Russia, maybe more than once. By the way, Finland won. Finland shares an 800-mile border. I'm making up numbers, but I think it's an 800-mile plus border with Russia. Finland particularly, but Sweden also, when invited to join NATO back in 1949, said, you know what? We're going to pass. Obviously, we're part of Team West. Obviously, we like Team West. But we're not trying to stoke a fire. We're not trying to give the Soviet Union a reason to be upset. We're not trying to inflame a situation. We don't need to join NATO. We're good. We want to keep good relations between Soviet Union and Team West, and we're semi-neutral, okay? Again, semi-neutral. They favored Team West, but they were not trying to intentionally join a club that, especially Finland, would share a border with a country, and Finland could have nuclear weapons pointed at Russia. So they didn't want to be in that situation. Well, guess what, folks? Changing attitudes, they're ready to join now. Exactly a year ago, say a year and a month ago, actually a poll took place, and the poll was to Finnish people, the population, not politicians, the population. How many of you would like to join NATO? A year and a half ago. It's called a year and a half. Less than 20% of Finns wanted to join NATO a year and a half ago. 1 year ago today, how many Finns would like to join NATO? 80% said, hey, we think we'd like to join now. This actually looks like a pretty good deal given what Vladimir Putin is doing and given his very obvious inclination to want to rebuild Soviet empire, or at least be much more aggressive and being much more aggressive of not liking the West. So what you got is a situation now. I'm starting to branch over multiple things I just mentioned to you about changing attitudes, changing budget, changing members. So this is changing attitudes and changing members. You're going to see an uptick of membership. Finland and Sweden have applied. They applied in May of last year to join. Almost all members want them to join. The only members that are blocking them joining are Turkey and Hungary. I know, it's a whole separate podcast. Hungary and Turkey are likely blocking that membership join simply to get stuff they personally want. In Hungary's case, actually I don't even know what Hungary's case is. Hungary is led by a semi-fascist themselves, so who knows with them. But Hungary will very likely relent, and there's already stuff happening behind the scenes that Hungary will say, yeah, that's fine. We won't block Sweden and Finland joining. Turkey is the bigger problem. Turkey has hesitated from allowing, NATO is 100% consensus. If any one country basically vetoes something, that's it. And so Turkey has said the whole time, we're not going to let those two countries in because they harbor terrorists. And what Turkey means by that is Turkey has its own issues with Kurdish rebels, and specifically in a political group called the PKK. I know I'm throwing a lot at you right now, but that's okay. Tell me what you're interested in an email, so I'll follow up with a better podcast. And so, by the way, I'm sorry, it's an hour and a half. Anybody who's in here right this second and you're in my class, email me right this second. Email me right this second with the keyword PKK. Give me your screen name here in Twitch and your real name in the class. You just earned 15 points for hanging out. So email me right this second. It's exactly 9:30. You have 2 minutes to email me at joboyer@vt.edu with the keyword PKK. And here's my screen name and real name. You just got 15 points for hanging out. And then I'm going to make this into a flash quiz you can get for more points later. So the Turks are holding out on allowing Sweden and Finland to join for their own reasons. They say it's because Sweden and Finland are anti-Islamic, particularly Sweden is anti-Islamic. That's what the Turkish are saying. And that these two countries allow PKK members, which is a Kurdish terrorist group, to live in their countries. And they are demanding that Finland and Sweden extradite and send back to Turkey all Turkish PKK people, which is not going to happen. However, that's probably mostly BS. They're mostly doing it as a strategic leverage that Turkey wants more money, or they want something, or they want to be respected more, and there's probably all sorts of behind-the-scenes negotiations happening that I will never understand nor know. Then eventually Turkey will be given what it wants, and it will allow Sweden and Finland to join. Finland probably will happen first. Sweden is the one that Turkey has a bigger problem with for lots of weird reasons. So, changing attitudes. Number one, Germany is no longer a peacenik. France is no longer a peacenik. Peacenik means you favor peace and will go out of your way to do peaceful activities all the way literally up to the last millisecond that war is breaking out. So neither one of those countries is willing to allow Vladimir Putin to keep doing whatever he wants. They are now ready, particularly Germany, to stand up, to be a military leader, to invest way more in their militaries, and to be a more active player of NATO. That is a huge attitude shift, especially for Germany. Especially for Germany, okay? The other attitude shift is other members, potential members like Sweden and Finland would like to get in now. That's a shift. They did not think that a year and a half ago. They do now. The other part of that attitude shift gets into the second thing, which is changing budgets. Because of the 2014 bylaw that said everybody who's a NATO member needs to spend 2%. And again, can somebody look this up? Is it 2% of GDP, or is it 2% of their national budgets? Let me see if I can find it in my notes. I have some.
GDP.
It is GDP. So every country is supposed to spend 2% of its GDP, at least, on its defense. Because, again, they're not giving it to NATO. You're not giving 2% of your GDP to NATO. You're saying you have to spend 2% of your GDP on your own military so that you're ready for NATO when NATO calls. All the European countries, like I said earlier, have been lax, have not been spending that much. And by the way, I'm not here beating the drum for armament of planet Earth. I'm just trying to explain why this is a big deal to NATO. And so a lot of the European countries have been lax. They've been relying on the United States to come save the day if anything happens. Many countries, many people in many European countries have said, the Cold War is over. Who cares? But now they're changing their tune with when Russian tanks start rolling into Eastern Europe, it changes everybody's attitude real quick. They're like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, this shizzle's getting real. Okay. You're right, United States. We are going to start spending up to 2% of our GDP on military. By the way, if any of you all were paying attention to current events over the last 5 years, actually 7 years now, 6 years. Biden's been in office 2 years. So you remember the Trump years? It wasn't that long ago. The 4 years of President Trump as leader of the United States, he berated all the time NATO countries. He threatened to get rid of NATO. He threatened to pull the United States out of NATO. He kept saying, look, they're not pulling their weight. It is funny that Donald Trump has many issues, many issues. And I am not defending the man. Far be it from me. He doesn't need my defense. He has 45 or 50% of the American population that love him and will defend him to their deaths. However, he was kind of right on the whole NATO membership thing. And he beat that drum from the day he got into office by threatening to pull the United States out of NATO, by berating other NATO members for not spending as much as they promised in the 2014 NATO bylaw, and he was correct to do it. And again, lo and behold, 2023, they're all doing it now. Trump's other thing that I believe he was on target for that has been widely adopted, if not praised, is his confrontational stance towards China and stealing of intellectual property, and that they are an unreliable partner for trade and lots of other things. Trump did that too, and now that's been completely embraced by the Biden administration. But I'm not trying to get off on a Trump tangent. The changing attitudes, changing budgets means that now all of these countries of NATO have now all of a sudden remembered that pledge that Donald Trump was reminding them about. And most of them will very likely within the next 1 to 2 years be spending 2% of GDP or more, maybe some up to 3% or 4% of GDP, Germany included, because they are now very actively worried about what's going on, as perhaps well they should. Again, we can talk about these things in political circles and we can talk about them as pundits, but when tanks start rolling your direction, that's when it gets real. And people are like, oh, wait a minute, this is real. I won't start spending the money now. So a lot more money is being spent. And part of this is, and a lot more money by the United States, by the way, because so much money and so many armaments, guns, tanks, planes, bombs, missile systems, missile defense systems, night vision, goggles, what do you call it, K-rations. All of this stuff is being sent to Ukraine by European countries and the United States. A lot of stuff is being sent there, billions of dollars. And so billions of more dollars are going to be spent by European countries to get up to their 2% GDP dedication to build up their own armies. But you're going to see the United States and these countries spending a lot more right this second because they need to basically resupply their dwindling stockpiles. So the United States has been giving away all the money that the European countries have given to Ukraine. Add that all together, the United States has given more than that. And in terms of not just money, but weaponry, stuff. And so the United States is all of a sudden going to be starting to spend a lot more money too because they have to rebuild their dwindling stock supplies of all these things they've been given. And NATO countries in Europe understand that they have to pony up because no one wants to see a United States that's in a position that they're given so much to Ukraine and to help buffer and protect Europe from Russia that the United States is then in a bad position in case they have to get into a war in Asia. And this is now I'm jumping to another thing. This is why NATO is retooling itself because there are changing attitudes abroad now because China's been watching all this too. Russia, 100%, Vladimir Putin thought the West is weak. They're decadent. They have no backbone. They have no taste for war. They have no backbone for war. NATO is weak. Look at them all. Their militaries aren't as good as ours. We could totally take Ukraine in a second. China was watching that. And as soon as Russia invaded Ukraine, everybody, including moi, said, yeah, Ukraine will probably fall in a week. That was not the case. And not only was that not the case, it galvanized and empowered NATO to start helping quickly helping they did. And the amount of aid and the amount of weaponry that has flowed into Ukraine inside of 1 year, that quickly, it is almost unheard of in the modern era. Unheard of! If anything, NATO is awesome at logistics. Awesome. I mean, you think about the concept of moving 1 million guns and tens of thousands of tanks and aircraft carriers to the other side of the planet within a month or 2 months or 3 months. That is a logistical nightmare, and it almost seems impossible, and Russia counted on that being impossible, and Russia was proven wrong. NATO's logistical capacities are unchallenged on planet Earth. And by the way, back to my point, China was watching that. China was like, oh, Russia's going to do that? Cool. Because we're eventually going to take over Taiwan and maybe other parts of Southeast Asia. So let's see what NATO does. It'd be hilarious if they fall apart because then we can do anything we want. And now China's like, crap. They actually did a really good job. This is retooling the way China's thinking about things too. And this gets back to my budget thing. All the NATO countries are going to pony up because they realize now that, yes, they're going to build up stuff to confront Russia, but they don't want the United States so weak that the United States can't face off if China or North Korea decides it wants to take over Japan, which China would never do, but who the hell knows with North Korea? Because Japan is not a NATO member, so North Korea could be like, they're bogged down over there. We're going to bomb the shit out of Japan, because what are they going to do? There's no Article 5 there, and they're bogged down. No! Hold on there, friends. It looks like NATO countries have done more than anybody predicted. 1 year ago today. Well, even 1 year ago today, it was 3 days into the war. Nobody knew how quickly NATO was going to respond to the challenge, and boy, did they ever. So, changing attitudes internally, right, and new members, changing budgets, a lot more money pouring into NATO, a lot more money pouring into defense agencies everywhere across NATO countries, a lot more money pouring into basic defense technologies, a lot more money going to be poured into defense innovations. A lot more money is going to be poured into defense logistics. A lot more money is going to be poured into all the defense contractors. Side note, if you're into stock investing, buy defense industries. None of them are going to go broke in the next 5 to 10 years. They're going to be making lots of money because all of these governments are going to be dumping money into defense industries to build up their capacities and actually build up their capacities to much larger than they've been since World War II. And that was 70 years ago, friends. So you're going to see an armament at the level of World War II for the first time in 7 decades, near on a century. A lot is going on. A lot of money is going to be spent, and that's going to lead to changing troop deployments and military focus. I keep saying I'm going to end 30 minutes ago. I really am trying to end so I can go have dinner. What's that?
Questions in there too.
Okay, well, I'll say this, and I'll go to, because I think I've covered most of the things I want to cover, at least tangentially. The last thing is changing troop deployments and military focus. And that means that in World War II, Germany was the aggressor, and so the fronts were on either side of Germany. Then World War II ended, right? And we all met in the middle of Europe. That became what the Cold War was all about. That's that map right there. And so that became the front line between East and West. But as you now well know, if you're looking at the map there, now the front line is here because the NATO countries have moved much further east towards Russia. And so what I mean by changing deployments is that Poland, since all of this started, and Poland since 2014 has said, hey, the Russians are coming, the Russians are coming. And again, Germany and France and others are like, oh, would you stop worrying? They just took Crimean Peninsula. Poland really does not want to become part of Russia again. Really doesn't. And Poland's a big country with a big population, and they've been spending money on defense. And so I'm suggesting that Poland is very likely to become the new Germany. Poland, and it was announced just very recently, Poland will have its first permanent U.S. base established in it this year. Yep, you heard that right. Permanent U.S. base. Back in the day, and any of you that were in the military, or perhaps they're still in the military, many of us who were in the military spent some time on a German U.S. air base or a German U.S. Army base, because back in the day, Germany was the place where the U.S. was putting bases, because that was the forward line of offense/defense. And what I'm suggesting to you all is Poland is now the front line of defense/offense. So you're going to see a lot more investment in Poland. And there's actually something called, let's see if I can remember it, what's it called? The EFP, something forward. Let me see if I can remember it. EFP. What does EFP mean? Somebody look up what see if I can find it in my notes real quick. The EFP is... Yeah, I'll find it in my notes. Hang on, give me 1 second. It's forward, enhanced forward presence. Thank you, Vet7, but that's not it. Enhanced forward presence is going to be beefed up significantly. And by enhanced forward presence, that means all those countries in Eastern Europe that are closest to Russia. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. These are places that have not had huge troop presence, have not had huge, say, defense shields, huge Patriot missile systems. They're going to now, my friends. because everyone is now saying, holy crap, we should have done that already. And they're doing that as a deterrent to Russia. The more military they have on that forward front, the less likely that Russia will even think twice about reinvading Poland or Estonia. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania are the ones that are much under much bigger threat, because they're small countries that do have ethnic minorities of Russians in them that Russia could use as an excuse to go invade them, much the same way they just did in Ukraine. So forward, what I say it was, enhanced forward projection, that's going to be a big catchphrase coming up, and Poland's going to be a major beneficiary of that. So you're going to see, it was something like there were, let's see if I can remember my numbers, something to the effect of 3,000. Here it is. NATO leaders have pledged to reinforce the Allies' eastern defenses and make up to 300,000 troops ready to rush to help allies on short notice should the need arise. That's enhanced forward presence. Right now, in all those countries I just named, let's say there's 30,000 troops. I think it actually is 40,000 troops. NATO is pledging this year to make that 300,000 troops, not all located there, but ready to move in within 24 to 48 hours. And under the current NATO response force, the alliance can make available 40,000 troops in less than 15 days. Under the new model, 100,000 troops could be activated in less than 1 week, with 200,000 more ready in 4 weeks. That's significant. And then add to that a permanent U.S. air base in Poland. And what I'm suggesting is you're seeing the movement of the true front line closer to Russia, which is the absolute opposite thing Vladimir Putin wanted when he decided to invade Ukraine exactly a year ago. It is kind of odd. So with that forward movement of troops, redeployment, increased defense budget, reallocation of troops and movement, reallocation of troops and defense systems, and probably offensive systems to the forward, to the front, to closer to Russia. This changes the whole game. It changes the entire game plan of how NATO has worked for 70 years. It's a very, very big deal. And I'll end with this. So I've talked about changing attitudes of major power players, Poland as a new power player, Germany reestablishing itself as a power player, militarily speaking, massive increase in budgets across the board of all NATO members, changing membership, increased membership within Europe. I will go ahead and throw out this teaser to you. I can't remember who asked me about this earlier, but could Asian countries join NATO? I think you're already seeing movement in that direction with this thing called the Quad. So there are other countries on planet Earth that are on Team West that aren't officially in NATO yet, but it seems likely that's the way the horse and cart are moving. And who do I mean by that? Japan probably should already be in NATO. South Korea will probably be invited to NATO. Australia? New Zealand? Why not? India? Could be, although they would be the ones that would probably hesitate. Australia and Japan, for all practical purposes, probably already are in NATO. Their defense pacts with the United States are so tight, the United States is going to come help them if they get invaded. So why not just get it over with and join NATO, and 30 countries will come help you. 32 once Sweden and Finland join. So you're going to see this retooling of NATO probably go global. It's changing the face of Europe. It's changing its internal dynamics. It's changing its forward movement, its defense forces, its budgets, and its global outlook, which affects not just Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also China's intended plans in Taiwan and other places in Asia. That's why this is such a gigantically huge deal. Sorry it took me 2 hours to get to this end point, but we spent the first 30 minutes just having fun. That's why I didn't want to make this into a flash quiz. It's like, let me condense all of this into a better flash quiz that I can post up permanently as the NATO Updato for 2023. And now I'll field the rest of the questions, and you guys can ask me, what did I not get to you'd like to see in the permanent recorded NATO Updato? What topics do you want me to explore more, or did I not explain enough, or did I miss anything? That's just my general take of why this is such a big deal right this second. And by the way, the biggest changes will become solidified in July when NATO meets for its first big conference since all this mess has happened and all of this retooling has started in Vilnius, Lithuania in July. You're going to see a lot of things I talked about become much more permanent and possibly talk of a global expansion of NATO, which to me, of course, will be the most interesting thing. Again, no offense to my Chinese or Russian friends or anybody who hates NATO or hates Team West. It's interesting because it's global changing. I'm interested because this changes the dynamic of what's going on planet Earth. That's why it's interesting whether you agree with NATO or not. Cool? Cool. Okay. Let me answer some questions, and you all tell me what else I need to get to for the permanent retooling of this NATO Updato. Let's see. First time chatter from Aiden non-Twitch that has it looks like an algae with eyeballs. I don't know what that means, but I like it. I think it's a COVID. I think it's a COVID molecule from Aiden Twitch. Let's see. Betsa7 says, side questions, Putin want to remove Ukraine from the planet and absorb it into Russia, or is he just looking to protect the Russians there? What is the main purpose of his attack, simply put? That actually is another 2-hour lecture, Betsa. And no one knows the true mind of Vladimir Putin, not the least of which me. I ain't a nobody. I just own a bar in Blacksburg, Virginia. But it does seem semi-evident by his own words, his own writings, his own speeches, and his own words, that Vladimir Putin does believe that the biggest geopolitical catastrophe of the last 100 years was the Soviet Union collapsing. He has made it perfectly obvious and with intent, in his own words, that some of the areas that the USSR lost should be reincorporated back into Russia. Crimean Peninsula was the first. The invasion of Georgia actually happened before. 2008 invasion of Georgia. Areas around the Black Sea, Vladimir Putin has made no bones about wanting to reabsorb back into the empire. And he sees Russia as a major world power player that should retake its place and perhaps retake its territories. So that's him as a political player saying, here is what the USSR used to be, and we should get some of that back. Okay? Every defeated country ever in the history of warfare has wanted something it lost in a war back. That's nothing new there. More personal to Putin, and the logic of his current argument, is that there is no such thing as Ukrainians. They're just Russians who speak with a different accent. And historically, Ukraine was the epicenter of the Russian Empire. And that is true. Now, I actually believe Ukrainians are separate, so I'm not saying that's true. But Kiev used to be the capital of the Kievan Rus, the origins of what became the Russian people in the Russian Empire. Back in 980 AD, Kiev was the center of the Russian Empire. Not geologic center, but it was the capital. And so Vladimir Putin has argued, again, in his own words, this is not me interpreting him, that, hey, this is us. Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians, all the same. This is us. He sees himself, what I call him, the Slavic savior. He is going to protect the Slavic people. He's here to protect the Slavic people wherever they are. And that includes Ukraine. And so he's making a historic, ethnic, linguistic, religious argument of why Ukraine actually is part of Russia and actually should be reabsorbed into Russia. And then to make the point specific to his invasion, he says, hey, there's actually ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine that we have to go protect because and again, this is his words, back in 2014, he made a speech. And he said, I, Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, am actually in charge of protecting all Russian people everywhere. I actually remember the speech. I remember watching him say this to this day. Hand to Zeus. I remember this speech, and I remember thinking to myself, that's a big deal. It's a big deal that most of the world didn't pay attention to at all. Let me say it again for you. He said, I, Vladimir Putin, am in charge of protecting ethnic Russian people everywhere. And what that means is he was saying, I'm not president of Russia. I mean, I am. I'm not just president of Russia in charge of Russian citizens, because that's members of a nation state or just a sovereign state. If you live in Bulgaria, you're a Bulgarian. If you live in Zimbabwe, you're a Zimbabwean. If you live in Russia, you're Russian. That your passport's Russian. He's saying, I'm not just protecting Russian citizens of this state. I'm in charge of protecting ethnic Russians wherever they are on planet Earth. I'm in charge of the Russians. And that's old school. And I've argued this for 7 years now. That's super old school. That's the way the world used to work. The French people were led by the French king, and the French king didn't give a shit where the borders of France were. He was in charge of the French people. The same way the Roman Empire was like, we don't care about the borders. You're citizens of the Roman Empire. You're our citizens. Wherever the borders are don't matter. Wherever our people are is what matters. And we're protecting our people, no matter where they are. Vladimir Putin really went old school on that. And he's using that to argue of, we have to go into Ukraine to protect ethnically Russian people who are being persecuted or picked on or whatever the story is. And he has already recognized the eastern sections of Ukraine as part of Russia. He already did that as well. He did that at the beginning of the war, shortly after the war, shortly before the war. I can't remember which one it was. So about a year ago, he said, oh, by the way, they're going to have a vote in Donbass, this region of eastern Ukraine. And lo and behold, 100% of them voted to join Russia. So we recognize them as sovereign and or part of Russia. And because they're Russians, we have to protect them. So they're part of Russian territory. So we have to go in and protect them. That's part of his logic here. Which, of course, the ultimate irony and the counter argument to Vladimir Putin, literally to his face, is, okay, Vlad. Can I call you Vlad? I'm going to call you Vlad. Okay, Vlad, you've made multiple speeches where you say there's no such thing as Ukrainians or Belarusians or Russians. You're all one people, which is why you claim that you own Ukraine. At the same time, you say there are separately ethnic Russians in Ukraine that you have to go protect. So which is it? You're either all the same, or there's ethnic Russians you're protecting, which means there's ethnic Ukrainians that aren't ethnic Russians, which negates your first argument. Right? Dude, they should send me to the UN. I'm just making this stuff up, right? Anyway, back to the questions. I don't know if that answers the question for you, Vetsa, but there's multiple claims being made. Ultimately, most of us think Vladimir Putin would like to get Russian credibility back and to rebuild the Russian Empire back as much as he can. Short of invading a NATO country, which of course really pisses him off. And maybe that's why he'll turn his focus to Central Asia next. It's hard to say. I think first and foremost in Vladimir Putin's mind, he wants respect. He wants Russia to be respected as a significant world power. And he wants to push back Western encroaching closer and closer to Russia, which is what Eastern Europe is. So he wants to send out he would like to have Eastern Europe back, I'm sure. If it was given to him, he'd take it. But he certainly wants to push back the advance of NATO and the advance of the EU, the advance of Team West up to his borders. He very much would like to counter that. I think there's no question about that. How he wants to go about doing that is a bigger question. Does he want to literally invade other countries and take them over? In Ukraine's case, yes. But is he willing to do that in Poland and risk World War III? Maybe he was testing the waters. But the tests haven't gone well for him, because if he thought he was going to get away with taking Ukraine easily and therefore he would do other things, that has now been dismissed. He is not going to get away with anything else easily. And by the way, when I raise my voice and I'm being passionate about these things, I'm not saying Putin's evil, he's terrible, and I hate Russia. No, I bring passion into the subject so you understand. Putin is very passionate about this, and I'm not passionate about it personally, but I'm saying he's been routinely dismissed about that endeavor, that he's not going to get away with taking over Poland or Estonia. Again, I'm not saying that because I'm being vindictive or I'm passionate about him not taking over Estonia. I mean, I kind of don't want him to, but that's my lecturing style. So I'm like, he ain't getting away with that. That's not me speaking. I'm saying history has now shown in the last year, he ain't getting away with that. We'll see what he does next. Ethan Owens, 23, up in the house once more, saying, I have a friend in the Finnish military. Putin does worry them. Yes, he does. The Finns have already fought a war against Russia. They won, but they don't want to do it again. They'd rather join NATO and be done with it. Thirsty Beta up in this place, saying the purpose of the attack is to demilitarize Ukraine. Ukraine armed and trained by NATO since 2014. Too much of a risk to Russian security. Not a bad assessment, Thirsty Beta. I think Vladimir Putin, line for line, would absolutely agree with that. In fact, I almost wish Vladimir Putin would have said that. That makes sense. If Vladimir Putin came out and said, hey, look, dudes, you guys got all these NATO countries, which are very close to our capital cities and major industrial centers. This is threatening. Now, they've said this behind closed doors. But instead, and to follow up on that, this looks threatening. And by the way, we're going to invade Ukraine because we're worried you're going to let them into NATO next. And that is way too threatening for us. So we're going to go first and take Ukraine back because we're worried about NATO and militarization of the state, which is very big and very close to us. That, although people would have said, myself included, hey, dude, don't go invade another country. But that is practical and realistic and seems truthful. What Vladimir Putin said instead of that is, Ukraine's Nazis. They're the Nazi party and they're trying to kill all the Russians. And you're like, sure. Sure they are. The Third Reich has risen again in Kiev. And they want to kill all the Russians, which you have no proof of. The world has no proof of. And seems like an incredibly divisive and ridiculous thing to say. But when you control the press and you control all the newspapers and the radio, you can say it in Russia. And many Russians now believe the Fourth Reich of Nazis has risen in Kiev and is literally trying to arm itself so it can storm across Russia in its entirety and slaughter all the ethnic Russians. Again, I'm not making light of genocide, but it's kind of one of those things of there's not only no evidence of that, on its face, it's ridiculous. So if you're going to say something ridiculous, at least have an example or two. Did you find mass graves of ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine with swastikas on it? What do you got? What have you got? Give me all you got. If you're going to make an outrageous claim, give me something. I want to believe you. But that's just so outrageous of, okay. So we can dismiss that out of hand. No one on planet Earth, including Vladimir Putin, believes that Ukraine is imminently getting ready to invade Russia, to kill all the Russians. But that's the argument he chose to go with. So that's why all of this becomes kind of so propaganda laden to be ridiculous, and you can just dismiss it out of hand. Had he just said, hey, we're worried about NATO. If I was the leader of a country and you were forced to speak the truth, or actually I just would speak the truth, I would say, hey, dudes, you guys keep flirting with the idea of inviting Ukraine to join NATO. We don't like that. And if you do it again, we're going to invade. At least just be honest. Be like, hey, this is counter to our defense strategy, And we will invade if you do that. Then you can have an honest conversation. But playing the Nazi card, you're like, did you guys just play the Nazi card? Because there's nowhere to go with that. There is no negotiation. It's ridiculous. But thank you, Thirsty Beta. I actually agree with your assessment. The Russians were actually worried about that, and they should have said that. I mean, they did, but they should have said, this is why we're invading. Let's see. I'm so far behind now. Michael 5000 says the PKK. Robin Jim says, thank you. James Dean supposed to email PKK. Right. Yes, that's right. I forgot what I even said. James Dean is trying out the swag message. I don't even know what that means. That looks cool, though. It's all like highlighted in purple.
Yeah, you're just testing out.
Gotcha. I don't know what it is, though. Let's see. Vetsa says, base Trump, LOL. Thirsty Bay, to be fair, how many wars happened under Trump? Only a trade war with China. That's funny you bring that up, Thirsty Beta. I've actually been fascinated by... If I could sit down with Vladimir Putin for 5 minutes, even 2, actually the first question I would ask him, I've been completely mystified. And I would ask Vladimir Putin, so, you know Donald Trump was like in love with you. It was like you're one of your besties. And he wanted to disband NATO. He threatened to. He threatened to pull the U.S. out of NATO. And he was your buddy. And he was trying to reestablish friendly relationships with Russia. Why on earth did you not invade Ukraine when Donald Trump was in charge? It has bothered me for over a year now. I'm like, I'm dying to know the answer. Why did Vladimir not invade when a friendly power, not a friendly power, but a friendly voice was sitting in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. controls NATO? That's a bit of a stretch, but you know what I mean. If NATO said, hey, if Donald Trump was in office, had won a second term, and Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, let me assure you, Donald Trump would have done nothing, and therefore NATO would have done nothing, because the U.S. would have had veto power and within the NATO corridors, by the way. It's like, so I am absolutely would love to know what happened there. Why did Vlad wait? Why did he hold his cards until all the stars were ready to align against him? It is very odd. It's a huge miscalculation on Putin's part. It's very odd. J. Mr. Manolo back in the house. Welcome back. J. Mr. says he was also leaving the WHO and left UNESCO and other UN agencies and the international organization. Interesting, China has used more of those spaces. Yep, I agree. He also pulled out of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I'm surprised Biden has not dusted that back off yet. It's still in existence, but the U.S. just pulled out of it under Trump. It's actually his first act in office was to pull the United States out of the TPP before it even got signed. Thirsty Beta says, how can China take over Taiwan when the official U.S. stance is a one-China policy? Very good question, Thirsty Beta. That's what all of us are asking, including people in the U.S. government and including people in the Chinese government. It is one of the big questions of the 21st century is what will happen in Taiwan and what will everybody do? Michael 5000 says, my grandfather did. Boom. Don't know what that means, but I like it. Vetsa with the explosively formed penetrator. I love that. Thirsty Beta says, imagine Russia or China had bases in Mexico and Canada. How would the U.S. respond? Exactamundo. You are correct. I would only counter Thirsty Beta with what I was raging about earlier, which is the U.S. did not force Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria to join NATO. In fact, no one forced them. They begged to join NATO. Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic were begging from 1991. They applied to get in NATO in 1991. So I understand what you're saying, Thirsty Beta. If any other adversary on planet Earth established bases close to the U.S. border, yes, that would be a huge problem. 100% a huge problem. However, Mexico is a sovereign state, and if Mexico wanted to ally itself with Russia, which it's flirted with in the past, the U.S. would be in the same position Russia is in right now, which is, should we invade right now and take them over? Or they're a sovereign state. They can do what they want to do. So do keep in mind, there are many people, you're not alone, Thirsty Beta. There are many people that say, hey, the whole Russian invasion, the whole Vladimir Putin invasion of Ukraine is all because, it's all the U.S.'s fault because NATO kept growing and is threatening Russia. I totally empathize. I don't sympathize, but I empathize, which means I understand. I empathize with that argument. I empathize with Russian defense security concerns. I 100% empathize. At the same time, all of those countries are sovereign states, and the citizens of those countries voted to do the things that they did. So we can't dismiss the people out of hand. We can't just say, the U.S. did this, and they're threatening Russia. The Polish people did this. The Estonian people did this. The Bulgarian people did this. And don't their voices count? Aren't they allowed to run their affairs as they see fit and to join international organizations that they feel are in their best interest? And I believe the answer is yes. So if Mexico decides it wants to join the Soviet bloc tomorrow, would I be happy about that? No. But I respect their decision as a sovereign state to do that. The U.S. wouldn't be happy about it either. And the U.S. might invade them, by the way. But I am not the U.S. I'm only speaking on behalf of, I respect a sovereign state's decision and the people of that sovereign state to do what they want. I also understand that countries will make decisions that they think are in the better interest of the people of their country. So I get it. It's a balancing act. It's definitely a balancing act. Vikram back in the house saying, why U.S. base in Poland? Is it because of the proximity to the Russian territory in the tiny red patch? You're talking about Kaliningrad. No, it's because Poland is a big country with a big population that is, quite frankly, much more aggressive, much more militaristic for its own reasons. Poland used to be an empire. Go back and do some historical research. I want to say 13th, 14th, 15th century. Poland used to be an empire. It was a big deal. It is a power in its own right. And now fast forward to the last 100 to 150 years, Poland has been screwed. Poland has been tossed about, bandied about. Its borders have changed. It's been taken over by big power, reabsorbed by another power, taken over by another power. The Poles have suffered. And the Poles are now back into a sovereign state, independent state status for the first time in a century. And trust me, I don't even know that many Poles, but trust me when I say this, the Poles will not go lightly back into that night. They will not be taken back over by a major power. They're not going to have it. And that's why I'm suggesting one of the biggest changes in Europe that you'll live through is the reestablishment and rise of Poland as a major power player in Eastern Europe and Europe as a whole. And the U.S. and others see this, and they're saying, well, Germany's starting to get on board, but Poland has a bigger stake in this game. Poland does not want to see a re-energized, aggressive Russia retaking over territory. They do not want to see that. The Poles, I won't say they're terrified of it. They are simply not going to have it. So if you are a betting man, which I am, the country I would bet on to defend itself at all costs against Russian aggression, that's Poland right now. Again, I'd bet on all the countries who don't want to be taken back over by Russia. But Estonia, I love Estonia. It's a great country. I've been there multiple times. I love Estonia. I'd move to Estonia. But it's a small country. Poland is not. And Poland is not going to take a inferior political situation again in its neighborhood in my lifetime. Now, who knows what's in another century or two, but it ain't going to happen right now, I assure you. And the fact that you see permanent U.S. military bases being established there, that is telling. That is telling you a lot. The U.S. is willing to partner up to do a permanent U.S. base. That's saying something, and I shouldn't beat this horse too much. Dead horse, I should say. I wouldn't beat a live horse. The the reason that's a big deal that maybe you're not thinking as deeply as I am about things, which is probably good. But it's one thing for the United States to say, hey, Poland, you're fired up. You want to fight the Ruskies, or at least be confrontational, and you're going to fight for your territory to the death? Good. It's one thing for the U.S. to give them money. It's another thing to give them guns. It's even another thing to give them missiles. That's all fine and dandy. The U.S. is risking nothing. Dig this. Putting a permanent U.S. military base in Poland means you're putting permanent U.S. citizens in Poland. That is an entirely different ballgame. 100% different ballgame. That means you're saying, Poland, we actually are with you. And if Russia bombs your country, that means we're putting our citizens on the line. And if our citizens get killed, watch out. Does that make sense? That's a much bigger deal. A much bigger deal. And if you don't understand why it's a big deal, you might want to ask yourself, why are there still 20 to 24,000 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea? I wonder why that is. Oh, I wonder why North Korea hasn't bombed South Korea yet. I wonder why that is. What a crazy coincidence. Why hasn't North Korea just taken over South Korea? What a coincidence. There just happens to be 23,000 U.S. citizens there. And you all don't have to be military strategists to understand how that story ends if North Korea were to bomb a U.S. military base in South Korea. You could say bye-bye to North Korea. That's how the story ends. And good night. Sleep tight. Sorry I got off on this tangent, but thank you, Vikram Tiwari. That's why the U.S. base in Poland is such a big deal. It's actually got less to do with Kaliningrad than forward movement on that front line that we've been talking about. Barbecue time says Putin's grandfather was Lenin's cook. I never heard that. That's hilarious. Twiction, good screen name. 2019 Twiction says, very happy to see you're back streaming again. Can't wait to rewatch parts I missed. Please post more lecture. Well, thank you, Twitchin, with a robot face icon. Aiden Twitch follows up with the robot face icon and the Putin icon. Michael 5000 throws down the Putin icon. You know, if you become a subscriber, you get the Putin icon. Is it subscriber or liking? I can't remember what it is. Katie will tell you. If you want the Putin icon, subscribe or do some crap. Only here for the Plaidcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Only here. If NATO eligibility gets expanded to Japan, South Korea, etc., what's your proposed acronym for that update? Brother, I have been thinking about that a lot. I am a master of alliteration and acronyms. I love thinking about what that will be called, and I have been working on it, but I do not have an answer yet. But I'm working on it. Michael 5000 says, source. I made it up. Vikram says, during Trump, why would the U.S. have the veto power when there's no vote if Article 5 is invoked by one of its members, say Russia invaded Poland? Yeah, Vikram, I kind of misspoke there. I just said veto power to summarize. There is no such thing as a veto in NATO, but there absolutely is such thing as a veto in NATO. It's so hard to explain NATO. NATO, at the meetings, they do not take votes. They don't take votes. They just talk it out. And I know this because Katie and I actually visited NATO headquarters at the actual NATO table, and they told us how it worked. The NATO people, not NATO, I'm sorry. Yeah, it was NATO. The NATO people said, this is how it works. We just talk it out. And I was pressing going, well, what does that mean? Well, we just talk it out. And people come to a consensus. And it has to be 100% consensus. So basically, if Turkey is still arguing that we're not there, if Turkey just says, well, I'm not sure about letting Sweden in, we'll keep talking, and if still at the end of the talk 5 hours later, Turkey still says, well, I'm not sure about letting Sweden in, that's it. Sweden's not getting in. There's no vote. So because there's no vote, there's no veto. But you understand what I'm saying. There actually is veto power because any one country can just not get on board. And so it's not officially called a veto, but it is a veto because one country can stop any action by simply not agreeing. So that kind of is veto power. I was just saying this is really veto power, but it's not called veto power. Let's see. James Dean came up with WATO, World Awesome Treaty Organization. I think we have a winner. I think we have a winner. Thank you, James Dean. Yeah. Melinda Panna says maybe Trump weakening NATO had given Putin the opportunity to plan their invasion, and if Trump wasn't elected, the invasion would have taken place a lot later than it did. Just guessing. That's not a bad assessment hypothesis, Melinda. Maybe Vlad and his crew truly really thought Trump was going to win. I did, by the way. I thought Trump was going to win. And that's not because I'm a huge supporter. I just looking at numbers. Remember, in the 2016 election, everybody said he was going to lose and he didn't. So when everybody said he was going to lose the second time, I didn't really believe that either. So maybe Putin indeed couldn't imagine Trump losing and therefore had plotted, a 5 to 7 year plan of invading Ukraine and was waiting for Trump to be back in power before he made his final power play. Then it didn't work out. And he's just like, well, hell with it. I'm doing it anyway. I mean, that's a decent hypothesis. We'll never know, but that's a good hypothesis. Barbecue Time says Poland always getting caught between the jaws of Prussia and Russia. Bam! That's good. That seems like a great title for a book, Between the Jaws of Prussia and Russia. The Poland Success Story. Thirsty Beta says U.S. has a history of regime change for countries they want control of. Can those countries still be considered sovereign after the U.S. has installed new leadership? Well, if you do have that opinion, I don't think I'm going to change your opinion by my answer, Thirsty Beta. All countries, especially powerful ones, work in their own self-interest. There is no disputing that. I am not a rah-rah America's great cheerleader, but I am logical and pragmatic. And so Thirsty Beta is suggesting that there are countries that the U.S. has pulled strings, either through the CIA or other covert means, to get rid of the leader. Sometimes in the United States' past, we've done that through brute military force. Not recently, but in the past. And so I concur. The U.S. has intervened in other countries' politics. No dispute. My only counter-argument, Thirsty, is what powerful country has not done that? And if we're going to go down that road of, well, anytime any powerful country has messed with another country, then that country's no longer sovereign. Okay. I would only try to think of it in perhaps a different way, which is many countries are messing with other countries all the time. In fact, even not hugely powerful countries are messing with countries all the time. And even allies spy on each other and mess with each other all the time. The U.S. and Israel spy on each other nonstop, and they're allies. So I wouldn't necessarily confuse manipulation or outright intervention into another sovereign state's affairs. I wouldn't equate that with permanent puppet status of that sovereign state, and therefore it's not a sovereign state anymore. It's really case by case. So if they're Thirsty Beta, is there a country specifically that you're thinking of that the U.S. covertly or overtly messed with that you believe is now just a puppet state of the United States? I am an open mind because there is so much going on that I don't understand everything that's happening on planet Earth. How could any single human understand what's going on planet Earth? But some of the sovereign states, Thirsty Beta, that I would mention right now, that I believe are puppet states, and I don't believe there are many, but Belarus is 100% a puppet state of Russia. Alexander Lukashenko is in power in that state by the grace of Putin and the grace of Putin alone. Russia could walk in there tomorrow. Russia controls virtually all aspects of the government. Lukashenko's more like a governor. He's more like the governor of Virginia to Joe Biden. He's the governor of Belarus to Putin's leadership. So Belarus is pretty much a puppet state. I'm trying to think of some other good examples in today's world. I could say China and Tibet, but Chinese people would be offended because they'd say Tibet is part of China. And I'm like, that's fine. I understand that. But it used to be a sovereign state or a semi-sovereign state that then the Chinese government effectively made into a puppet state politically. Other places, I mean, I understand Thirsty Beta, there's many examples of the U.S. screwing with other people's elections, but I can't think of any that the U.S. controls right now, and therefore they're not sovereign. The U.S., again, and others, mess with political leaders in certain places that they feel will have an agenda that will be contrary to their country's agenda. And that's the history of states throughout human history. Hell, that's the history of tribes all the way up to towns and villages to sovereign states to empires. That's the history of humans messing with each other when the tribe next to you is going to do something counter to you. So, sorry, I'm just kind of ranting here. I was waiting to hear what examples you wanted to use of the U.S. having a regime change that now control those countries. I actually can't think of any. The U.S. can heavily influence countries through monetary means and maybe even military threat, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Vades 7 says, is South Korea part of NATO? No. The NATO map, we can go back to it, is here. So the NATO map, and it does include U.S. and Canada, which you see in the little corner up there. But it's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization because it was both sides of the Atlantic post-World War II. However, of course, Turkey and Bulgaria and Romania and Estonia don't have a lot of Atlantic coastline, but that's how it started, and then it grew. And so that's why we would have to come up with a new acronym if we start seeing NATO invite other democracies that are part of Team West, particularly, I would think Australia, New Zealand, and Japan and South Korea are the likely next four. Japan and Australia first. New Zealand will even have some qualms. South Korea will be very problematic and would be inflammatory to China. So we might not invite, NATO might not invite, say, South Korea. Japan seems obvious. The U.S. already has a treaty of defense with them. Australia seems obvious. The U.S. already has a treaty of defense with them. So those seem like the obvious ones were it to expand further. And Vincent says, why do they not join? They haven't been invited. Barbecue Time comes up with NAPTO. North Atlantic Pacific Treaty Organization. Ooh, I do like that. It could be NATO and PATO. NATO plus PATO. Yes, NATO PATO. James Dean says NATO doesn't allow any non-Atlantic nations currently. It's not so much they don't allow, they actually haven't considered it. They truly have not considered it yet. Barbecue Times comes up with North Atlantic Pacific. Yep, NATO PATO. And James Dean says exclusion for U.S. and Canada, but that's it. Well, they're in NATO. In fact, Canada and the U.S. are NATO and PATO. We could have a different PATO. Pacific Atlantic. Atlantic is the A. POTO. Pacific Ocean Treaty Organization. POTO and NATO. Just making shit up now. So, U.S. and Canada, by default of geography, would be a member of NATO and POTO. POTO-NATO. NATO-POTO. And, Thirsty Beta. Back to Thirsty Beta says, think of Iran in the 1970s and Ukraine in 2014. I would agree with Iran in the 70s. Although, Thirsty, I would not say the U.S. had covert operations. It was called Operation Ajax to manipulate and help overthrow a anti-Western actor president there. Again, there's nothing unique about that. The U.S. and Russia and other countries have helped overthrow leaders in other countries they didn't like. But even then, during the Mossadegh era, we, the United States, supported the Shah of Iran. But he had internal support too. Usually you have the internal support of the military and of the rich people. So it's easy for the United States or Russia or China or France or the UK. It's easy for powerful countries to manipulate a local smaller country to help put an influential figure in charge. But that figure has to be supported by somebody there. And usually it's the rich people and the military. And if the rich people in the military support even the worst of the worst leaders, they'll be in charge for a while. I would only say that that's different than the U.S. taking over Iran and running it, because that's never happened. The U.S. can screw with Iran, but they've never outright taken control of it. That's usually the U.S. way. The U.S. goes in and helps get someone in charge that's more friendly to a U.S. agenda, but they're not physically there in charge themselves. By the way, 200 years ago, that might have been different, but not so much in the modern world. But I like where you're going with that. Iran definitely was manipulated heavily by outside forces. And by the way, it wasn't just the U.S., it was the U.K. And your other example is Ukraine in 2014. Ukraine has been an absolute, utter, chaotic mess for the last decade. No one has been in charge of Ukraine, much less the United States. Ukraine has been essentially in a state of civil war for going on a decade now. Very close to a decade. I've been following Ukraine my whole teaching career, and it's just been a mess the whole 21st century. Just an absolute mess. You've had multiple elections that have seen multiple polarizing people be elected. Some pro-Russian, some pro-Western. So you can't say the U.S. is in charge of it. They elected a pro-Western guy a pro-Russian guy at one point. You can't really say the U.S. or even Russia's been in charge of it, because it's been almost a semi-state of civil war for so long. It's been so chaotic that anyone who even claimed to be in charge would be on a fool's errand. So again, did Russia and the United States have a vested interest in who's in charge of Ukraine and which way it would go? Absolutely. Has the U.S. been in charge of Ukraine? Hell no. Has Russia been in charge of Ukraine? Hell no. If either side was in charge of Ukraine, why is it in a war right now? I mean, it's very evident that this country has been battling for its own soul from within for easily 10 years, and one could argue 20. So I'm not sure I buy at all the case that the U.S. somehow has been in control of Ukraine. No one has been in control of Ukraine. Its very history and its current situation make that perfectly clear. Even if Russia had been in charge of Ukraine, then Russia wouldn't have had to invade it. So it is a battleground that strong exterior powers have been trying to manipulate or just at least get on their side. But no one has controlled it. Don't think that for 1 second, Thirsty Beta. No one has controlled Ukraine, not even the Ukrainians. And I know I'm now at 2.5 hours, so I will wrap up here so I can go have some dinner. James Dean, yes, is that my sleep-deprived mind? And Aiden Non-Twitch says the PATO, Pacific Atlantic Treaty Organization. There you go, PATO. I think we're on to something, team. Well played, everyone. Thank you all so much for tuning into this. If I could get one last shout out. Thank you, Thirsty Beta. Thanks for your input, by the way. Don't ever think for a minute that you can't have a counter-opposing argument or opinion when I'm here chatting. I love it. I don't particularly like fighting about anything, but I'm not here on Twitch even as a college professor, which I barely am. Just because I've been teaching for 30 years doesn't mean I'm an expert in anything. I'm a generalist. I like coming here. I like talking with folks. I like understanding the way that other people are thinking about things. So by all means, don't ever feel bad of saying, hey, I disagree with you, or I think the Russians are doing all right, or I think the Chinese are awesome, or I think the U.S. sucks. That's cool. We're here to talk about all things, and I just want to get a shout out of everybody. Did this help you at all? Do you understand NATO at all? Or any of these points I brought up seem important to you? Do you understand why I came up with this or where I'm going with this? And I will develop this lecture into a more graphics-oriented, independent NATO Updato 2023, based a lot on the input I got back from you all. So thank you all so much. Hope you have a great night, and we'll see you again next Monday, unless you want to tune in for the wine online half-hour happy hour on Wednesday. Thank you all. You guys are too awesome. I actually may give you even more than 15 points. I think it's going to be up to 20 points to everybody who already emailed me back at 9:30 an hour ago when I thought I was ending this. So thank you all so much. You guys totally rock. Oh, wait a minute. Private Ham just came in with potato. Pacific Ocean Transatlantic Treaty Organization. Oh, my God. Potato for the win. Potato for the win. Private Ham, please email me, Potato. You just got another damn 10 points. That was brilliant. Oh, I don't know how to do the raid. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. We forgot the raid, and Katie already left. She ran out of... yes, Am Offer, you're getting extra credit. Thank you all so much. And we'll do this again. I don't know how to raid. Can you guys raid from here, or do I have to raid? Hang on, I'll see if Katie's still paying attention. She went into the other room. But maybe she's coming back. Yeah. Yeah, okay, Katie's back. Do you guys have somebody you can raid?
Sorry, my computer died.
It's okay. Hi, everyone. This is Katie.
Hi. Who are we raiding?
Who are we raiding? Is there some sort of Twitch channel that's Tusken Raiders from Star Wars? I want to raid a raider. Is there a room on Twitch that's Raiders of the Lost Ark? I only want to raid raiders.
All right. Raid channel. Pick a channel. What we got?
Somebody pick a damn channel.
We got nothing. Thanks, team.
Thanks for nothing, team. Who the hell are we raiding?
Oh, that's good.
Is there a Oakland Raiders channel? There you go. We got Fabled 42. What's that?
I don't know. What makes me nervous?
From the tribunal sewers for days for
Fabled
Ebony.
42. Yeah, we'll raid gamers. I don't care.
If they have like 1,000 viewers, they're not gonna. Sure, yeah, let's do it. They need some love. Let's do it.
Community of content creators, designers, artists, streamers. Yeah, let's do it.
We're on it.
We're on it. Thank you all. Party on.
It's only at 9. Start raid. Let's go. Okay, now you're there.
Oh, this is raid now.
I tried. I think we raided.
Okay.
God, raid now. I don't understand.
Good day. Good day. Didn't have a presentation and it went 2.5 hours anyway.
Some kid just said, "What do I have to email Professor Boyer?"